The IP which may reside in OpenAI, in reality, has actually already been incorporated into a lot of Microsoft stuff. So it's kind of already there at Microsoft.
So you're right, Microsoft will have more control on OpenAI, but tomorrow, let's say the new CEO at OpenAI wants to partner with other hyperscalers, which is a possibility, and Microsoft, yes, it owns 49%, but then there are other investors in the company who may say, you know, why is OpenAI limiting themselves to Microsoft? And that is where I feel like the more control will help, but you know, the team will get disintegrated no matter what. And OpenAI is...
You think it'll get disintegrated?
Yes.
Why?
I mean, there will be people who leave. Yes, they have no confidence in the current board,
right.
But I mean, you read Mark Benioff tweeting yesterday, they want to attract talent. There are others who are looking for talent, Meta and I think Anthropic and others. And there was even a rumor about Anthropic and OpenAI merging, which they declined. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Okay.
And it's from an employee perspective, it's quite a nervous time. I mean, you will look for other options.
Mandeep, does this in a way reset the race, opening the door for Meta and Anthropic to try to leapfrog or surpass OpenAI and Microsoft's efforts?
I mean, look, ChatGPT was way ahead of other competing large language models like Anthropic Claude and Meta Llama, but both of them were in contention. Some people espouse the open source approach that, you know, Meta has taken, and there are other models that have been open source since then. And ChatGPT had an advantage because they were multimodal, they were the most accurate, so clearly they had built an ecosystem. This kind of sets them back because GPT-5, I don't think it's coming out anytime soon.
Well, that's what I want to know is how quickly can Altman and the potentially 500 people leaving OpenAI integrate within Microsoft and actually get operations back to where they were?
I mean, will they have influence on OpenAI sitting in Microsoft? I don't think so, because the ChatGPT model is OpenAI's intellectual property. Yes, Microsoft is an investor, and it provides all the compute behind the scenes, but they can't influence when you know, OpenAI releases GPT-5 and who else they want to partner with. So I do think, you know, the IP belongs to OpenAI, and if Microsoft has to develop a model with Sam Altman's help, it's going to take at least a year, if not more, to develop a competing model.
That's a different view.
That's what I'm interested in that, because Ives was very much...
Well, that's why, I mean, that would, the stock hasn't done anything on this news. And if it were such a win-win-win-win-win, wouldn't this stock be up a lot?
Now, building a model from scratch requires data. Yes, Microsoft has all the compute, and they are the provider of compute to OpenAI, but they don't have all the data, and this model building is very iterative. There's a lot of human feedback involved in terms of improving the model, which OpenAI has done over the last 7 years. So Microsoft, even if no matter how many resources they throw at it, they can't just incorporate that human feedback element in short time.
So what should I be? I know nothing about this story and how the technology works, but I'm following it closely. To me, the next data point is data points is really, where is Sam Altman going to reside going forward? And then number two, how many of these employees join him? Are those the next things to really get clear on?
And we did get some indication, because 90% of OpenAI employees said they want to go with Sam Altman. Okay. So that was a big validation of his leadership. Yeah. Had it not happened, that would have been a really bad scenario for Microsoft. So that's a good thing. And then Microsoft obviously wants to partner with Sam Altman. But I can't imagine if Sam Altman is in Microsoft, he will have the same kind of influence on OpenAI as he did as the CEO.
Well, because the names that are always thrown around with Altman, and I say always, really the last few days in particular, people point to Steve Jobs, they point to Elon Musk. To your point, those were men who were in leadership roles and able to do what they want. So with that in mind, how long can Altman reside within Microsoft? And we're talking about Nadella gushing about going wherever he wants to go and keeping him in-house. How does that work? Look,
there could be cultural issues. I mean, we know, you know, OpenAI was a startup. Microsoft is a behemoth, and they just bought a $70 billion company, Activision. So how many companies can they, you know, incubate inside Microsoft? Yes, Nadella is very passionate, But I can't imagine them, just going all in with Sam Altman because they have all the other businesses to take care of.
You bring up in your note a couple competitors, so Meta's Llama and Anthropic's Claude.
Yeah.
Who is behind these other competitors? Because all we talk about and all I ever see is Sam Altman meeting with Biden, meeting with Rishi Sunak.
Well, look at Anthropic. So they got an investment from Google, and they also got an investment from Amazon. So there is nothing that says one large language model can only have the backing of one hyperscaler. In the case of Anthropic, it was a lesser known name, and they got the backing of these two. And obviously, Google is developing their own proprietary model. Meta's model is open source, and they have actually built quite a good ecosystem, which is helping improve the model. So clearly, there is competition, and what it does is it slows down OpenAI, and others get more time to catch up.
In looking at comparables, is this similar to the EV race? Is this similar to the cell phone, the PC? Like, how does this fit into other models that are likely more familiar to investors and people who have kind of lived through the last few decades?
I mean, look, what you need to build a large language model is compute, which all the hyperscalers have, and data and distribution. Data is the part that the hyperscalers don't have. They have the distribution, they have the compute. Data is what they don't have, which OpenAI actually did quite a good job, and all these other startups have done it. But to my mind, distribution is key, and clearly Microsoft has that. So that's why you see all the hyperscalers in the running, and the startups can do it by themselves. OpenAI couldn't do it by themselves because they didn't have the distribution. So you have to partner. But they don't have the data, and that's where Google has an advantage. Meta has an advantage. They have their own data. Microsoft doesn't have data. It's on, they have Bing data, but that's not enough.
All right. If I were to invest in OpenAI, this is what I'd want. I'd want the Altman and the other guy to go back to OpenAI. I want a new board and I want new governance, and that is the ideal situation. Can that happen?
It can help. I think it's a best outcome. I don't think they're going back to where they were last week because these sort of things never return. And we know markets, once they lose faith, they don't. It doesn't come back that quickly. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but that's the best outcome for Microsoft and OpenAI.
Mandeep, about 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Who would be on the board from Microsoft if that were to play out?
I'm sure they will appoint somebody from the company. It could be Nadella himself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Boy, fascinating stuff here. I want to see how this plays out over the next few days. It seems to be fluid, to say the least. Mandeep Singh, he's here to help us keep us up to date because we don't know what's going on. Mandeep Singh does because he's a tech analyst, senior tech analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence, eats, breathes, sleeps this stuff. So we appreciate getting a few minutes of his time. OpenAI governance. Who knew that was important? More coming up. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now with Lisa Mateo.
Paul, Citi is back in the headlines again, but not for the job cuts that we heard about yesterday. A female equities manager has filed a lawsuit against the lender in federal court in Manhattan, accusing her ex-bosses of sexual assault and harassment. Now, she says the bank knowingly tolerated a hostile work environment on the trading floor. Citi says it will defend itself against her allegations. Now, Citi down a fraction. The Department of Justice says U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland will hold a press conference at 3 p.m. Wall Street time to announce separate but related cryptocurrency enforcement actions. Now, sources tell Bloomberg the DOJ is seeking more than $4 billion from Binance. Flight attendants at American Airlines could be going on strike. Bloomberg's Steve Potisk has that story.
Their union has asked a federal oversight board to allow it to end contract talks with the carrier. The Association of Professional Flight Attendants says American's latest contract proposal doesn't adequately compensate flight attendants who haven't had a pay raise since 2019. American says it has an industry-leading offer on the table.
Now, in case you were thinking about it, if you're traveling, American says there is no possibility of a strike over the Thanksgiving and December holidays. Right now, shares of American Airlines, they're down about 2.5%. And Emirates is investing $2 billion to refurbish its Airbus A380s to extend their lifespan. But they're also putting the tons of recyclable materials from the makeover to good use. The carrier is turning the seat leather and other fabrics into a limited edition collection of shoes, belts, and backpacks. Who knew? Those are the company stories we're following this hour. I'm Lisa Mateo, and this is Bloomberg.
Events, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We begin with a developing story. Headline off the Bloomberg Professional Service. Binance's Changpeng Zhao plans to step down and plead guilty. This according to the Wall Street Journal. The journal says the plea deal may preserve the company's ability to operate. But again, repeating the headline, right now, Binance's Changpeng Zhao does plan to step down and plead guilty, according to the Wall Street Journal. We're looking at a down day right now for the U.S. stock market. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. This ahead of those Fed minutes coming up at 2 o'clock Wall Street time. And, of course, earnings after the closing bell from NVIDIA. NVIDIA shares down now by 1.6%. S&P lower by 11, down by 0.2%. We've got the Dow down 79 now, also down 0.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 0.7%. 10-year yield 4.41%. The 2-year 4.87%. Spot gold is surging $22 the ounce, up 1.1% at $2,000.06 right now. West Texas Intermediate crude is down 40 cents a barrel to $77.43. Lots of retail earnings this morning, among them Lowe's Corporation, the home improvement retailer, down 2.7%. Rival Home Depot, it is down now by 0.9%. After earnings, Dick's Sporting Goods up 4.6%. Best Buy shares down 0.5%. Abercrombie & Fitch down 3.3%. Kohl's Corp down now by 8.2%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie Pell, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Man, what a story here. Binance founder Changpeng Zhao agrees to step down, plead guilty. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Just another crypto exchange after FTX going down, and just extraordinary. Let's break it down a little bit with somebody who's really into this business. Matt Siegel, he's over at Van Eck, and we talked to Matt a lot about crypto. Matt, I know they were investigating Binance and Mr. Zhao for a while, but I mean, this is a leading exchange here. What do you make of this?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it is a big deal. Binance is, the largest spot crypto exchange by some size, but we've been seeing all year that Binance has been losing share as investors have been anticipating some type of enforcement actions. We see this every cycle. Old main characters in crypto retire or get arrested. New main characters emerge. You can see Coinbase kind of acting well on this news. Probably bullish for Coin.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so who are the winners? As you mentioned, Coinbase right now, little changed on the day. Bitcoin actually briefly turned positive. Like, what is the read across to other tokens, to other exchanges on this news?
I think it's a continuation of the trend we've seen this year, which is Coinbase picking up market share because they are the closest thing to a regulated entity inside the U.S., given their custody solution. And that's despite the fact that, the SEC has sued Coinbase as well for selling unregistered securities. But I think the most important thing here is that, according to the news reports, at least, Binance will continue to be able to operate. So this should not have any dramatic impact on the market, on anyone's coin holdings. It'll probably be a gradual market share loss as the story plays out.
Hey, Matt, as someone here, I'm just speaking to myself, don't have a lot of experience in the crypto space, but when I see leading exchanges run into these legal problems and the executives run into these legal problems, I'm just like, this is the Wild West. Why would I even pay attention to this? Can you give us a sense of how much of a concern that is for people in the crypto space that, man, this looks bad?
The main use case, or one of the main use cases of digital assets, is the ability to custody them yourself in cold storage. When you hand over your keys to an exchange and leave your keys on an exchange, by definition, they are going to hold your coins, settle the trade, clear the trade. The whole stack is condensed into one. That can be a very efficient way of doing business. It's just doesn't have a ton of regulatory clarity here in the U.S. But when you're bank is failing over a weekend, you're pretty happy to be able to move your dollar stable coins onto an exchange and monetize them, which you can't do during a bank run. So there's some inherent advantages to this tech as well, though you note the risks.
Matt, $4.3 billion is, according to the journal, what they will be paying, and CZ will retain his majority ownership in Binance. Either of those, that number in that update, surprising at all?
It's a large number, but the SEC claimed in the Kraken lawsuit yesterday that Kraken made $43 billion in 2020 and 2021. So presumably CZ has negotiated this settlement and can afford it. Binance will continue to operate.
Wow, just an amazing story, amazing development in the world of crypto. So stay on top of that. Again, Matt Siegel, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate getting you to hop on this and give us your thoughts here. Again, Binance founder Changpeng Zhao agrees to step down and plead guilty. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Again, the CEO of Binance, the leading crypto exchange out there. So big news for crypto. All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk about our C-suite. We've got a new publicly traded company here, and we have the CEO with us, Tim Oliver. He's the CEO of NCR Atleos, which was spun out, I believe, yesterday from NCR, and it trades under the symbol NATL right now. Tim, thanks so much for joining us here. Talk to us about Atleos. What do you guys do, and why the spin out here?
Yeah, completely my pleasure. It's hard to follow finance and AI, and we're a boring company. We're a physical transactions company, which are actually still growing decently well, even though some of the more electronic transactions growing more quickly. We spun out of the old NCR. NCR was a physical transaction company. We did both POS and ATM. So I'm part of the ATM company. Atleos is the ATM company. So think the world's largest or leading provider of ATM services. We have over 600,000 machines in service currently that we touch on a regular basis. So we serve and can keep up and running primarily for our bank customers. That said, 80,000 of those machines are our own machines that we run on our account in a network in the U.S. called the Allpoint Network that are in locations that, let's call it blue chip retail locations, like a Walgreens or a Target or Circle K. We run those on behalf of our network customers, who often are times are neobanks or others who don't have physical assets.
And Tim, we're seeing a rise in the number of companies breaking up via spinoff, and obviously you go from CFO to now CEO of Atleos. What's the thought process behind breaking up NCR, and kind of what's your view for the company going forward now that you are the man in charge?
Yeah, we joined NCR about 5 years back, the leadership team that was charged with trying to transform NCR into more of a software-led company than a hardware-led company like it had been for a very long time. We were successful. I think our employees get that. Our employee base has changed pretty dramatically. The way we go to market has changed dramatically. Our customers get it and are very pleased with the transformation of NCR. The only folks that didn't get it were our investors. We had a conglomerate discount. We couldn't shake the legacy hardware image that had been assigned to NCR, even though hardware makes up less than 20% of what we do today. And so when we talked about a strategic review process, it was probably 3 years in the making. Many times we had folks approach us who might be interested in buying the total company, who their first action was going to be to break it into at least a couple of pieces so we could make it easier and cleaner for the markets to understand our strategies and our deployment of capital. And that's exactly what we ended up doing ourselves. When the outside markets continued to undervalue the two companies in aggregate, we spun into two. It was a long process. It took about a year. It was much harder than I anticipated that it would be. But it's gone exceptionally well. October the 16th was our first day of trading. We're now, I think we're a month or so in, and we feel very good about where we are.
Hey, Tim, the payments business really at a crossroad here. What's the growth story for your company now?
Yeah, well, we're a physical transaction company, right? And most folks believe that ATMs are dead and that no one uses cash anymore. And as you will know, that's not the case. Cash transactions, in fact, are up. They're up in the U.S. They're up in the UK. As a percentage of total transactions, they're not up, but at the aggregate number are up. Those who use cash and prefer to use cash have done so for the better part of their consuming lives, continue to consume that way today. And in fact, many of those folks who consume using cash are being paid digitally. And so they need the ability to translate their digital assets to physical assets. to go transact. Our ATMs now are much more capable than they've ever been before. You don't just dispense cash. You can pay bills at those devices. You can put money or take money out of your gaming accounts. You can harvest the value of your stored value in some of your loyalty programs. You can put cash into the machine, which is actually a pretty lucrative transaction for us. It has become a very, very rapidly growing transaction. So the ATM still matters. It matters a lot. And our bank customers now don't want to handle physical transactions. They'd much prefer that we do that for them. They'd rather outsource most of those transactions to us and to our devices. And we're happy to catch those.
And Tim, just real quickly, 30 seconds, talk to us about just a lot of your stuff your business is outside the U.S. What are your growth markets, or what are your strongest markets?
Yeah, so we're 80% of our employees are outside the U.S. About 55% of our revenue is outside the United States. The U.S. is still at 45%, a big market, growing very nicely. The U.K. is very important to us. Australia, New Zealand are big markets for us. We have big employee bases in Serbia and in Dundee. Those are markets because our employees there are super important. So, but think the crown countries, and the U.S. is where most of the growth is right now.
Yep.
Really good success last year in Portugal and Greece.
Okay, great stuff. Congratulations on the spin out. Tim Oliver, CEO of NCR. Atleos spun out of NCR, trades under its own symbol now. NATL is the ticker on the New York Stock Exchange. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. We'll get world and national news with Nancy Lyons.
Thanks, Paul. Talks between Israel and Hamas appear to be intensifying through intermediaries on a potential truce deal that could see some hostages released from the Gaza Strip. We get the latest from Bloomberg Washington correspondent Anne-Marie Hordern.
This would be for potentially as many as 50 to 100 hostages that were taken by Hamas. We know that's around a number of 240. So this would be only women and children. It would come with a number of days of a pause, potentially 4 days of pausing of what is going on in Gaza. On top of that, it would also mean Palestinian women and children would also be released from Israeli jails.
Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern notes talks in the past have fallen apart, but the leader of Hamas has said they're moving closer to an agreement. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he hopes there will be good news on hostages soon. He's holding an impromptu cabinet meeting to discuss the possible deal. Well, the great holiday exodus is underway as we hear from Bloomberg's Amy Morris.
Well, today and tomorrow are the peak travel windows for what is expected to be the busiest travel periods of the year. AAA says nearly 5 million people are going through the airports. Amtrak expects close to 1 million to ride the rails this week. And nearly 50 million Americans are driving 50 miles or more today and tomorrow. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg says they're looking to reduce flight disruptions, and he warns that bad weather could slow things down this week. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
For those who are traveling by car, you'll see a lower price at the pump. According to AAA, the national average for a gallon of regular gas is about $3.31, 25 cents less than a month ago, and 36 cents less than a year ago. This exceeds the typical seasonal drop in gas prices during the fall. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
Profits, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Binance Holdings and its CEO, Changpeng Zhao, have agreed to plead guilty to criminal and civil charges under a deal worked out with the Justice Department. This according to the Wall Street Journal. The Journal says Zhao has agreed to step down as CEO and plead guilty to violating anti-money laundering requirements as part of the settlement, which included the Treasury Department and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Matt Siegel is head of Digital Assets Research at Van Eck Associates, and he was interviewed moments ago right here on Bloomberg Markets.
We've been seeing all year that Binance has been losing share as investors have been anticipating some type of enforcement actions. We see this every cycle. Old main characters in crypto retire or get arrested. New main characters emerge. You can see Coinbase kind of acting well on this news. Probably bullish for Coin.
And right now we do have Coinbase shares down 1.2%. Stocks are trading lower across the board. Right now we have got the S&P 500 index down 8 points. That is a drop right now of just about 0.2%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 60, a decline there of 0.2%. NASDAQ lower by 90, a decline of 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.40% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.87%. Gold up $22 the ounce. Spot gold right now is at $2,000.52. Gold seeing a gain right now of just about 1.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude lower now by 0.6%. WTI is at $77.35 a barrel. So again, recapping, we do have the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all trading lower. And a headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service. And Sam Altman, members of the OpenAI board, have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and CEO to the AI company. This according to people with knowledge of the matter. Developing story. Stay with Bloomberg for the very latest. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I mean, Charlie Pellet's just breaking news all over the place. I
Unreal.
can't keep track here. So Charlie's out with the news. Altman and OpenAI board open to talks for his possible return. Possible outcome, adding Altman to transitional OpenAI board. I mean, we're going to have more, as Charlie's mentioned, we'll have more reporting on that coming up. But, man, this is a fluid situation.
Feels like a saga that's going to be playing out over the Thanksgiving holiday.
Exactly. All right, let's talk travel. As we head into this, Thanksgiving period, huge personal travel, leisure travel. I want to talk, though, about business travel. I don't know where we are in terms of pre-pandemic levels of business travel. It feels like it's still below, and I'm not sure how this is going to be evolving here. But let's check in with Beth West. She's the editorial director of Business Travel News. That's a part of the North Star Travel Group. Beth, thanks so much for joining us here. Where are we in terms of business travel today versus pre-pandemic levels?
Hi, thanks for having me, and thanks for hosting some insights from BTN. I think in terms of the return to business travel for the large corporate market, we're about 80 to 85% recovered, and that is according to the numbers we see coming from big agencies like Amex GBT or distribution companies like Sabre. They're looking at booking rates recovering at about the 85% level and spending rates probably a little bit above that.
And how are you seeing this play out based on company size? Are you seeing large corporations rushing to get people back flying around the world? Are smaller companies more interested, even though things like Zoom exist, to get people at conferences and meeting face-to-face?
Yeah, well, I think there's not really a replacement for the face-to-face meeting. And what we've seen, not only in the leisure market in terms of demand to get back to see your family and friends, we've seen the exact same impetus in the corporate travel market as well, trying to get in front of your clients and colleagues who may be located in very different places now than they were prior to the pandemic. So a couple of different things, certainly pent-up demand from just especially the sales side of the business and getting in front of clients, but also getting in front of your colleagues, which has been was a rarity during the pandemic, and really needing to have that collaboration travel and those collaboration meetings. So I think those two dynamics are really playing out in the market right now, and driving business travel to a pretty steep recovery in 2023, and I think we'll see more in 2024.
So I'm wondering, just, I was never a big Zoom fan myself, but, are you seeing signs that, hey, maybe for some business customers, that really is kind of the new normal? Unless I really need to get on a plane, I can kind of get a lot of this stuff done via Zoom or whatever?
Well, I think we have to think about the competitive environment when we talk about stuff like that. I think there's kind of an artificial environment during the pandemic where everyone thought, well, we can get work done this way, and we did. But that's because everybody was getting work done that way. I think now that we are past that point, we still need that human touch in the business world, and the big deals aren't going to get done via Zoom. Will we see some attrition in corporate travel to technology? Yeah, I think we're going to see that. I think there's an argument in terms of sustainability for that Zoom meeting or that Teams meeting. But when you really need to get business done, face-to-face is the way to go. And we've seen that immensely in the meetings market. Huge growth there.
And Beth, one thing that I've been at least tracking when I talk to friends and colleagues who are traveling for work, they're slapping on a vacation or working from somewhere else on the back end
They
of that.
certainly are, yes.
How does that impact some of the demand you're seeing where, if I'm working Wednesday to Friday, why not stay in Miami Saturday, Sunday, and work from there Monday?
Yeah, so obviously I think that has never been, no one's really been super shy about doing that ever, but I think after the pandemic, the opportunity to travel, the opportunity for personal enrichment on the back of business travel, when you're already there, you're already close to your bucket list spot. You're just going to do it, and you're going to take the opportunity. And we see that as a huge trend in business travel. We call it blended travel at BTN. You might also hear it referred to as bleisure, which is becoming one of the most hated words. But it's definitely changing the product offering of both airlines and especially hotels. They're really looking to understand how they can serve that customer better, who is both a leisure traveler and a business traveler all in one trip. And it's making some changes to the market, I think.
Hey, Beth, talk to us about the conference business. I'm a big fan of the big trade shows and the conferences. And how was that business in terms of coming back? I think of cities like Vegas and New Orleans, big conference towns.
Yeah, so I think if you ask the hotels, they will tell you that the group business, and that includes corporate meetings, including conventions that may only house, part of their attendees or participants at an individual hotel, but they're really like a citywide event. They will tell you that those groups are getting bigger, but I think in terms of the number of groups actually in circulation and the number of forward-looking bookings that are, on the schedule right now, they are tracking far ahead of where those bookings might have been in 2019, looking into 2020, or for sure during the pandemic. It's been a huge success story for the hotel sector to look at this group business and how it's booking and how it's really getting ahead of it. And pricing rates on that, because of the compression in the markets, the rates on group bookings have been really quite high.
Yep.
And they can command those rates because the demand is there.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. Just judging, from Vegas, seeing some of those big conferences, still just massive. So it's good to see that business back. Beth West, thanks so much for joining us. Beth West is an editorial director for Business Travel News, which is part of the North Star Travel Group. So we appreciate getting an update there. Certainly, lots of news breaking here today. It's just been amazing, Bailey. The most recent one is Sam Altman and members of the OpenAI board have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and chief executive officer to the artificial intelligence company. And that's according to people with knowledge of the matter. So just extraordinary. We want to check in with Ashley Vance. He is a reporter for Bloomberg Business Week. Ashley, talk about a fluid situation here. I don't know if he's at Microsoft. I don't know if he's going back to OpenAI. What do you think's going on here?
Well, yes, it's a fluid situation as it has been for the last couple of days. I mean, the big thing that seems to be changing is that the board of OpenAI had sort of cut off communications for a while with Sam and with other people. And it seems like at least overnight, Sam and Adam D'Angelo, the CEO and founder of Quora, who's on the OpenAI board, have been chatting. There is talk that, progress has been made and some sort of resolution. Exactly what that looks like is not clear, but that we're heading towards some resolution. And also that the new CEO of OpenAI, Emmett Shear, appears, quite dissatisfied with the board already.
Wow.
Ashley, how important are the investors driving this? It feels like if I'm an OpenAI investor, the last thing I want is the entire brain trust to jump ship and go join Microsoft while I sit on likely losses ahead of what was expected to be a massive IPO at some point.
Yeah, I mean, look, the investors, since the moment this first happened, I think, wish they could just go back in time and just bring OpenAI back again. And so, of course, yes, they've been working in the background. I think Microsoft has the most to lose and the most to gain. And to Satya's credit, I mean, maybe to his discredit, he took this big gamble on OpenAI to begin with. But to his credit, seems to have been, a pretty deft negotiator at this and getting Sam and Greg, at least at Microsoft. But, the investors are pushing. I think really they have almost nothing to do with this at this point. It's kind of like, how dug in does the board want to be? And are they going to get something that they want to make this go away?
And Ashley, it seems like from all the folks we've talked to, in order for Sam to go back, the rest of the people to stay, this board absolutely had, and we heard it from Satya Nadella last night when he was interviewed by Emily Chang, got to be changes in the board, got to be changes in governance. Is that part of any package, presumably, for Sam Altman to return?
Yeah, I mean, it's I hate to use the word impossible, but it's near impossible to envision some scenario where Sam is coming back if there aren't some kinds of changes on the board. It's hard to imagine Microsoft being happy. At the same time, look, the only constant through all of this has been that the board was unhappy. They took drastic action. They've been sticking to their guns. And so, how big of a change will this be, I think, really remains to be determined.
And Ashley, when this news first broke, Paul and I were talking about how this was reminiscent of Steve Jobs when he was coming back to Apple, basically saying everyone on the board's out except for one person. Is that where we're going? And is that kind of the best parallel to draw for Sam Altman and OpenAI?
I think that's what the investors would want, something like that. But to be honest, the reporting hasn't got that far yet, and I'd be a little skeptical. Just they have a lot of power at this moment, and they have clear concerns about Sam. That's all we know. We don't know what their concerns are. We just know they don't want Sam running this company, and they feel like there should be safeguards around OpenAI. So it's very difficult to tell. I just would not expect the whole board to go. It doesn't feel that way to me, but this is just gut instinct.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking to Mandeep Singh, who's a tech analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, and I asked him the question, for the good of the company, for the good of the technology, this AI technology, is it better for Sam Altman and team to be housed within Microsoft or back with the OpenAI report, structure, presumably with a new board and new governance? And Mandeep was saying it's better to not be a part of Microsoft because it's be tough to be part of a big corporation there. Maybe Sam Altman's not cut out for that corporate life. Is the feeling in the Valley that if we can get everything kind of put back together the way it was with a new board, with a new governance structure, is that the ideal outcome here from what is a very messy situation?
I think that's probably the ideal outcome for just about everybody, except for the board and some of these, the people who are quite afraid of where AI is heading, and some of like the, there is a camp of people who think this is the way things should have been done. Maybe not exactly how they should have been executed, but I think 98% of the world kind of wants to see this get over and move on.
And Ashley, is there any sense on the timing of this being resolved?
No, I mean, all we're hearing right now is that finally this dialogue is open. It feels like this has gone on for months. It's only been 2 or 3 days. But there really had not been much progress for the last, day and a half. And so this is the first time we're hearing that sort of discussions are taking place. So I don't know. Maybe there's something happens today. That's sort of what I'm expecting.
Wow, just extraordinary stuff there. All right, Ashley, thanks so much for joining us here. That was Ashley Vance. He is a reporter for Bloomberg Business Week, and he and Ed Ludlow and Emily Chang are out with the latest reporting on the Bloomberg terminal. Sam Altman and members of the OpenAI board have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and chief executive officer to the artificial intelligence company, and that's according to people who know what's happening out there. So it's interesting stuff. So we'll stay on top of that news. Oh, and we've got some other news.
More news.
Binance. I mean, the CEO, Mr. Zhang, pleading guilty. Fraud. Just an amazing story. Let's get some more reporting on that. Ava Benny Marson, she joins us. She's on the crypto, the Binance, the CZ guy. She's a legal reporter for Bloomberg News. Ava, what's going on with Binance? This seems to be a shocking development in the world of crypto.
Yes, but it's been a long time coming. This investigation has been going on for a number of years, and there's been, a lot of rumors about what this settlement would look like, what the kind of penalty would be for CZ, the CEO of Binance, and the company itself. Now we're hearing that the DOJ is going to make an announcement about this investigation later today. There's a few details that are trickling out this morning. The Wall Street Journal's reported that Binance and CZ will plead to criminal and civil charges to resolve this investigation, which has mainly been focused on Bank Secrecy Act violations, money laundering allegations, and sanctions evasion allegations as well.
And Ava, is more than $4 billion, is that a big number?
That's a massive number when we're talking about corporate resolutions of criminal and civil investigations involving the DOJ. We were discussing this yesterday, and we can't really think of we couldn't find another crypto company that had paid that amount. But I think it speaks to the depth of this investigation into Binance and the market share that it has. It is the world's biggest cryptocurrency exchange.
And Ava, I kind of see in this reporting by the Journal here, the deal would allow Zhao CZ to retain his majority ownership in Binance, although he won't be able to have an executive role at the company, and he would be facing sentencing at a later date. Why do you think the government allowed him to retain his stake in the company?
I think to my last point that Binance is such a massive presence in the crypto world and is the world's biggest cryptocurrency exchange. From our reporting from our colleagues as well, that we've heard that DOJ wanted to really try and strike a balance that would allow Binance to continue operating, but obviously come up with the right penalty that suited the alleged wrongdoing here.
Wow, just extraordinary news here today. Ava Benny Marson, she is a legal reporter. Thank you very much for joining us. Ava is a legal reporter for Bloomberg News. We appreciate getting some of her thoughts here. So I'm just, the Bloomberg terminal's just exploding with news here. Again, I'm just looking at my top stories. Altman, OpenAI board, open talks to negotiate his possible return. Wow. And then in the world of crypto, Binance, the leading exchange, to pay $4.3 billion fine, and CZ, the founder, to step down in a U.S. deal with the government.
So much for a shortened holiday week with NVIDIA earnings, and that's the only thing that matters. Paul, the one thing that's interesting, Bitcoin back down north of 1%. Microsoft had been trading at session lows prior to the latest Altman headline, but interesting things going on with big market companies and obviously crypto.
In crypto, which is just huge. So again, stay with Bloomberg for all the reporting, because we have an army of reporters out there that we lean upon and give us the great reporting that we can bring to you. Sound On with Joe Matthew. That starts from Washington, D.C. right now.
Now, from our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
Two major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover that.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
Hostage talks progress, but will an announcement help President Biden at home? Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As the president today tells reporters, we are very close to a deal. We're going to talk about the latest with Daniel Fried, the former ambassador, now distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council, about the way forward in Israel. And we'll talk about the political side here domestically with Spencer Kimball, the executive director of the Emerson College Polling Center, cooking up new numbers from the campaign trail with analysis from our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us for the hour. So let's get started, as always, with a look at Wall Street and get back to New York, an update on trading, and Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. Lots going on. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. Do want to recap and reset here because we've got fast-moving developments in a number of stories, especially the OpenAI saga. Sources tell Bloomberg Sam Altman and members of the OpenAI board have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and chief executive officer to the artificial intelligence company. Another major story that's developing as we speak, Binance Holdings and its CEO, Changpeng Zhao, have agreed to plead guilty to criminal and civil charges under a deal worked out with the Justice Department, this according to the Wall Street Journal. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all in the red. We are just about 1 hour away from the latest Fed minutes. S&P 500 index right now is trading lower, down by 9 points, a drop of 0.2%. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 72, a decline of 0.2%. NASDAQ lower by 92 points, down 0.6%. So a down day for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. 10-year yield 4.41%, the 2-year 4.87%. Spot gold at $2,001, up $23 the ounce. Bitcoin is trading lower by 1.5%, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 0.5%, 77.46 a barrel. So again, recapping, stocks are lower, S&P down 9, a drop there of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. If you're not there yet, search Bloomberg Global News. We're streaming all of our shows throughout the day here on the radio network to bring them to you and bring you right here in the studio with us, and I hope you'll meet us there with the latest on Israel. We are waiting in Washington, and of course, we're waiting around the world for a headline on hostages. As Israeli forces engage in heavy fighting with Hamas, a deal could emerge at any moment. We just heard from the president a short time ago holding an unrelated event about counter-narcotics at the White House before he takes off to Nantucket for Thanksgiving. The president of the United States opening with an update on this very issue. Here he is.
We've been working on this intensively for weeks, as you all know. I've spoken recently about it with both the Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Emir of Qatar. My team is in the region shuttling between capitals. We're now very close. We could bring some of these hostages home very soon.
Very close. The key words there from the president, not unlike what he said yesterday at the Turkey pardoning event on the South Lawn, very close. Remember, he held up his seat. He was crossing his fingers when he was talking to the reporters. And here's what we understand, according to reporting at Bloomberg. This deal, brokered by Qatar, expected as soon as today, and we've been saying that for a couple of days, realized would have essentially two phases to it. It would be coupled with a multi-day ceasefire, and the first phase would be about 4 days worth here. Hamas releasing some 50 Israeli women and children held in Gaza, while Israel releases 150 Palestinian prisoners in return. You do the math here. Israel would release 3 Palestinian prisoners for each Israeli hostage released, based on what we understand here. A second phase could unlock a lot more, as many as 50 more Israeli hostages in exchange for a longer ceasefire. All of this remains up in the air and is being negotiated as we speak, and that's why we're lucky to have former Ambassador Daniel Fried with us. He's now the Weiser Family Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council, but has spent a career doing diplomatic work, former National Security Council Senior Director. He's former ambassador to Poland, as we spoke with him a lot in the, of course, outset of the war in Ukraine, and former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe. So, Ambassador, thank you for making time for us here. What's happening behind the scenes right now? What are the back channels sounding like as we approach a potential deal?
Well, we'll find out more after the deal is done, if it's done, about how it came about. There will be articles written about who did what, but we can be sure that this is a difficult, complicated process. The Israelis and Hamas are not talking to each other. They're working through intermediaries. The U.S., I expect, is involved in some way, maybe the Egyptians as well. This is a complicated negotiation, and all it will produce is a possible temporary cessation of hostilities and a release of as many hostages as the Israelis can get out. It is not a stepping stone necessarily to any wider diplomatic discussions to end this conflict. Those have to wait. It's a decent step, and you can see the Biden administration has put a lot of effort into this initial step.
When we know that we're working through a third party, essentially, in the Qatar officials working on this, to what extent is the administration directly involved, the State Department directly involved, or is this a chain of communication going through Qatar?
I think both. I think it likely that there is a chain of communication going through Qatar. I think the U.S. State Department is involved, talking to the Israelis, talking to the Qataris. I am confident that the U.S. is an active player in this process. Stepping back a bit, you can see that the Biden administration and President Biden himself want to move toward a diplomatic framework to end this conflict. To do that, you have to have a start, and it has to be done in ways that both parties can accept. The Israelis are in no mood to stop fighting Hamas, which they believe rightly wants to wipe them out and is perfectly prepared to massacre more Israeli civilians if they can. The Arab countries would love to see the possibility of getting back to negotiations, but negotiations that don't involve a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, are not going to go very far. The idea that we could work around it through the Abraham Accords has been blown up, but this is easier said than done. Some of my diplomatic colleagues started out in pushing Arab, Israeli, Palestinian peace deals when they were young, and now they're not young. We've seen this for decades. We've gotten close before. The Americans have tried, and they have never landed a deal. But you can see that the Biden people want a deal, and in President Biden's op-ed in the Washington Post, he outlined some of the parameters. So the United States is looking ahead, and this possible deal for hostages and a temporary ceasefire could be a first step, but that's a small first step, and the steps after this get harder, not easier.
Well, with regard to the next step, we're talking about a second phase potentially, and I realize this is all very tenuous. That could include a longer ceasefire, Ambassador. We keep hearing that a ceasefire is not tenable, that it would simply allow Hamas to reload, to reset itself in Gaza to the detriment of the Israelis. But I wonder if you see this differently and if you see it as the potential for the beginning of a longer-term ceasefire. Could this be the beginning of the end of this war?
The Israelis have said repeatedly and strongly that there's no going back to the status quo before October 7th. They're not going to allow Hamas to remain as an organization in Gaza, preparing for the next assault on Israel. That's pretty clear from them. At the same time, they are facing massive opposition, and you can feel it, disquiet within the Biden administration at the number of civilian casualties. It's an ugly war. The fact that Hamas started this phase of the conflict is of little help to the Israelis, who find themselves in a difficult position. The Biden people want to move ahead with the diplomatic process, and you can see that they're trying to get to someplace decent after this horror. I respect what they're trying to do, and I wish them every success. But it is not easy. I don't envy them.
It's great to have you back, Ambassador. I wish you and your family a great Thanksgiving. Daniel Fried of the Atlantic Council, former ambassador to Poland, former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg Sound On. As we try to get to all sides of this story here, it's not just the economy, stupid. The reaction that we've been seeing in polls recently, particularly from younger people with regard to President Biden's foreign policy, has not been good for someone running for re-election. And that's where we want to add the voice of Spencer Kimball, the executive director of the Emerson College Polling Center, straight from my alma mater, Spencer. It's great to have you here on Bloomberg. Welcome. I know you're doing great work at the polling center, and you're constantly asking these questions as we make our way through the campaign cycle. And I want to ask you some more specific things about the work that you're doing. But with regard to foreign policy, with pro-Palestinian protesters chanting genocide outside DNC headquarters, how much of a problem could this story be for Joe Biden in this campaign?
Well, thanks, Joe, again for having me. And as you mentioned, we've had a chance to look at this issue now, unfortunately, for 6-7 weeks. And we've seen a dropout of that younger vote for Biden. College-educated vote has also dropped out. And when you look at that head-to-head matchup with Donald Trump, he now trails by 4 points nationally. And remember, he wins the election by 4.5 points 3 years ago. So he's got some room to make up now from this current situation.
What do you make of the college-educated vote? And is that something that you saw coming?
No, the college-educated and the post-grad vote are kind of the lock-in vote for President Biden. And the youth vote, the 18 to 29-year-olds, are the ones who put him over the top. They voted for him nearly 2-1. So now we're starting to see some shifting of these constituents, and they're not necessarily going over to Trump. They're kind of leaving him to the undecided group, or they're looking at the Cornel West or Robert Kennedy, Jill Stein candidacies, and see if maybe one of those candidates are more in line with their policies. But right now it's very fluid in that presidential race.
I'm sure that we can get to this from a couple of different angles, but it's both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue here. The Senate is something that Democrats are pretty worried about. You've been doing research on this as well. In any number of races here, whether it's Sherrod Brown or John Tester, is the Senate the next biggest concern, or is it the greatest concern for Democrats when you start looking at these elections coming up in less than a year?
Well, I think you could take a cue out of what we saw last week in Kentucky, where you had a popular Democrat, you have a very unpopular incumbent, Joe Biden, but the Democrat Bashir was able to win by 5-6 points against the Republican. And I think what we're seeing in Ohio, at least early on, is a candidate like Sherrod Brown is still leading the three potential Republican candidates. John Tester is also able. So there seems to be a disconnect with voters who are willing to split their tickets, maybe voting for Trump, but then voting for the Democratic senator. Of course, in West Virginia, we didn't see those numbers, and that's why you see Joe Manchin step down, because he saw himself trailing already at this point. Those other Democrats are still leading.
As opposed to the Senate race in California, which I know you ran numbers on recently, and I was looking at this, that's going to end up being a Democrat, right? It's just a question of which one, and it could end up being one of the most expensive races in the country as a result.
Yeah, that's a fascinating race, but particularly the former baseball player Steve Garvey just got in the race as a Republican, and he shot up to 10%. The question is, can he remember, California's got that runoff election, jungle primary, where everybody's in the top two runoff. Yep. Katie Porter and Schiff are in the lead, but just by a few percentage points. Barbara Lee and Garvey is right down there. So you got like 4 horses up there. We'll see if the Republican is able to get into that runoff. Otherwise, you'll have 2 Democrats vying for Feinstein's seat.
Boy, I'm sure there will be no drama surrounding that race at all. What are you seeing in New Hampshire, where Nikki Haley, in your last poll, was surging in the Republican side here? We talked about Democrats, but in terms of the Republican primary, this has been game on for Nikki Haley since certainly the last debate, and it's not so much for Ron DeSantis based on your numbers. That poll got a lot of pickups. What are you seeing since then?
Yeah, so Haley, it's good news for Haley. She's up at 18%. She's the alternative to Trump, at least in New Hampshire. But as you mentioned, we've been doing polls in Ohio and California, and she's really at 6-7%. So in the early states, she's put in the effort and she's doing better. My concern for Haley would be, come South Carolina, she's still trailing Trump by 30 points. And if you lose your home state, that's generally, the end of the campaign. So she's going to have to really make some inroads in her home state if she wants to contend. On the flip side, Trump's numbers stay where they are. So he's still at 49-50% up in New Hampshire. So it's almost like there's a jockeying for second underneath him. And it's important. Who comes in second might become the nominee in 2028.
Well,
So there's a lot at play.
For a lot of reasons. Well, it could also in
right.
24 for a lot of reasons. But in our remaining moment here, as we spend some time with Spencer Kimball from Emerson College Polling Center, this could take on a lot of different forms over the course of the next year. Is it the early states that we should be paying attention to? You mentioned the difference between Iowa, New Hampshire, and Ohio, for instance.
Yeah, so in the nominating contest, it's what we call the momentum. And so what Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis is going to try to do out of Iowa is beat expectations and then jump to New Hampshire and try to carry on some momentum into the early primary states. The difficulty there is that Trump is over 50% in all of these states. So it's hard to see where that momentum will happen. But, magic and, lightning in a bottle could happen, and we could see some changes. Otherwise, you're kind of looking at, who's the future of the party, presuming in 28 we have an open seat.
Makes you wonder why Joe Biden is not up on the air yet. And we're going to talk about that with our panel straight ahead. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Big thanks to Spencer Kimball. I hope life is well at Emerson College. They're busy in the polling center, not far from New Hampshire. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. Binance Holdings and its CEO Changpeng Zhao have agreed to plead guilty to criminal and civil charges under a deal worked out with the Justice Department. This, according to the Wall Street Journal. Another developing story that we're following, sources tell Bloomberg Sam Altman and members of the OpenAI board have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and CEO to the AI company. It is a down day for the U.S. stock market. Stocks lost steam after a rally that put the market on pace for its best month since July of 2022, with traders awaiting the Federal Reserve minutes coming up in 38 minutes from now and NVIDIA's results. Right now, we have got the S&P 500 index down 12, a drop there of 0.3%. We will get NVIDIA's numbers after the close of trading. That stock down now by 1.5%. The Dow lower by 79 points, down 0.2%. NASDAQ down 114, drop there of 0.8%. 10-year yield 4.42%, with a 2-year yielding 4.88%. Gold back below $2,000 the ounce, barely. It is higher by 1.1%, up $21 at $19.9945. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, $77.55 a barrel. So again, recapping, stocks are lower. S&P down 12, drop there of 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
It was a Monday night out at Mar-a-Lago for the new Speaker of the House. You see this, Mike Johnson, according to multiple reports, dining with the former president. Well, at least meeting. I'm sure they had to break bread, right? They met at Mar-a-Lago. Of course, this follows Mike Johnson's endorsement of Donald Trump last week, bringing us back to his words in 2015. Mike Johnson said Trump lacks the character, this is a quote, lacks the character and moral center we desperately need again in the White House, unquote. I guess it went well enough that he's endorsed Donald Trump's reelection and, of course, moved to decertify the electoral results in 2020. So the question is, did Donald Trump just endorse the laddered CR? Let's reassemble our panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick, what do you think when you hear of the new speaker following the path of Kevin McCarthy, flying down to Mar-a-Lago? I realize he's been touring the country trying to raise money, but this particular meeting is significant. What does it mean for his agenda in the House?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to watch today, some of the spin. I mean, his staff are all out saying, oh, no, he was down there for a fundraiser for Billy Ricas, and, you know, he just happened to be in Mar-a-Lago and just happened to bump into Donald Trump, and they had a short conversation. I mean, like, it's really amazing to see how he's trying to massage this as being not like a kowtowing to Trump, like you mentioned, former Speaker McCarthy did in front of all of us. Look, I mean, you knew this was going to happen at some point in time. Mar-a-Lago is the center of the Republican Party these days as far as fundraising goes. And so, you know, I'm not surprised that they had this opportunity. Remember, too, you know, Donald Trump put his finger on the scale because the other option, Congressman Emmer for Speaker, was someone who absolutely had a bad relationship with Donald Trump. And so in many of these situations, as you well know, it's not the candidate you want. It's the candidate that is less bad as the one who's running against him.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I wonder, Jeannie, with all the questions about can Joe Biden work with this new speaker, what does it say when he shows up at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump about that happening?
Well, you know, I think, I don't know why everybody's so surprised. I think Donald Trump has done a lot since the 2015 statement when MAGA Mike was worried about his ethics, to assure all of us that he is an ethical individual. Hence the turnabout about MAGA Mike and heading down there. I mean, the reality is This is him. He needs to do this. He's got to be out there fundraising as the new speaker. He's trying to meet donors. Many of them are in Florida, not just this time of the year, but all around. And of course, that requires that he not only endorse Donald Trump, as he did, as you mentioned last week, but also go down there and kiss the ring of Donald Trump. It's not going to impact all, I don't believe, his dealings with Joe Biden any way than it already would have. I mean, let's not forget, Mike Johnson was one of the individuals in the House pushing this preposterous legal theory. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. Even the conservatives on the Supreme Court scratched their head saying that Joe Biden didn't win the election. So I don't think it's any surprise that he goes down there, nor that he turns around based on what he said in 2015, just like Kevin McCarthy before him, and kissed Donald Trump's ring, regardless of what they said about him earlier.
Well, let's talk money here. That's apparently what the trip was, at least in part, about Rick Davis. We know that Mike Johnson's been traveling the country, and he's got big shoes to fill because Kevin McCarthy, if you don't know this about him, was a prolific and remains a prolific fundraiser. Now, remember, we had numbers from October emerged last night, and we're going to walk through the money here for a moment. The NRCC, Rick, says it raised $5 million in October. That's $3 million shy of the DCCC. But that also took place when there was essentially no speaker. This was the month of chaos. Some folks thought there might not be a dollar donated. Is this good news for Mike Johnson?
You know, it's not horrible news in the sense that, it's not zero, which
Right.
it could have been. And then most of that money, the $5 million, came via transfers from other Republican campaign accounts. So you're kind of stealing from Peter to pay Paul. You're taking it out of one of them campaign account to put it into the NRCC's. And that's a standard practice. Everybody gets done for money. NRCC puts it into more competitive races than a lot of these guys have. So, but look, I mean, it has been a great couple of months for the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives, and fundraising, I'm sure, is drying up as a result. And you take, as you said, the most prolific Republican fundraiser of anybody other than Mitch McConnell and kick him out of his job, Kevin McCarthy. Man, something's going to happen to give, and money is the thing. Johnson is an untested speaker, both legislatively and fundraising wise. And so that's one of the reasons that he was down in Mar-a-Lago. He's got to start earning his spurs with raising money, and too soon to tell, but by year end, he has got to show progress with the NRCC for a war chest going into 2024.
I'd love your thoughts on what appeared to be a pretty good month for Democrats, Jeannie. The DCCC, as I mentioned, raised over $8 million, has $47 million on hand. On the Senate side, the DSCC, the NRSC, both raised the same amount, but Democrats have significantly more on hand, $15 million compared to $7 million. How do you read these results from October?
It's a good sign for Democrats. Of course, it's going to be a very, very tough year, particularly in the Senate for Democrats, but also in the House. I mean, you know, there are seats that they are going to have to defend in both cases that make this a tough year. And so they need all that money. They were smart in the House, for instance, in the way that they did the transition from Nancy Pelosi to Hakeem Jeffries. And they have worked, by all accounts, very, very closely. She, like Kevin McCarthy, a prolific fundraiser. And you want to keep those people close and build on their fundraising prowess and the connections they have. And so that's what we see Mike Johnson out there on the Republican side trying to do. Of course, he starts out a bit behind, but I think he will likely make up. You know, I have to say, in this case, I think the bigger challenge on the Republican side is not necessarily the fundraising, as critically important as that is. It's what you were just talking to Spencer about. It's the reality is that if Republicans are going to nominate people like they seem prepared to nominate out in Arizona, Carrie Lake, it's going to not matter as much how much money they have when they need to go and get these seats. And that is very, very difficult. Candidates matter. And you go down to Mar-a-Lago, you kiss Donald Trump's ring, and you know who he is going to go for. It's an election denier. And the question is, do people really want to go to the polls in 24 and vote for a senator or representative who said that Donald Trump won the 2020 election? It hasn't been a winning strategy thus far. So money matters an awful lot, but candidate quality matters. And that, I think, is a bigger issue for Republicans who now have an election denier at the top of the House as well.
Well, Rick, some conservative Republicans are raising money on the Discord within their own conference. Look no further than Chip Roy, who's out with fundraising emails, says, I didn't come here to act like the Democrats. And, of course, we're still recovering from his stem winder on the floor before everybody left town. Here's Congressman Chip Roy.
I want my Republican colleagues to give me one thing, that I can go campaign on and say we did. One.
I don't know if you want to try to name one, Rick, but apparently the speaker wasn't too happy about that speech. What does that say about what he's going to return to next month?
I think Chip Roy's going to be Chip Roy, right? And whether or not he can influence the rest of the caucus is, I think, of a limited value, right? I mean, he hasn't really been able to influence the caucus since throwing Kevin McCarthy out of the job. That's why he's so, excited in that speech, because he realizes, I think, for the first time in a while, that he actually doesn't have any pull. And as long as Johnson continues to pull Democratic votes for passage of important things like appropriations bills, he'll be fine. Chip Roy will lose his voice because he screams too much, and the Republicans will continue to pass legislation that can actually get signed by the president.
Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzana with us on the fastest show in politics. We're going to talk presidential debates coming up, not on the primary trail, the real ones in the general election. We've got dates and cities, but who will be on the stage? More with Rick and Jeannie ahead as we update world and national news now with Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. Thanksgiving travel days are in full swing with millions of Americans expected to travel through the country's airports today. The TSA notes that more Americans are traveling for the holiday even earlier this year, thanks to remote working, which allows for more flexibility. Glenn Story is a Boston man traveling with his family to San Francisco to visit his mom and sisters.
We came early, but we still have like 2.5 hours to board, so hopefully everything will work out.
Story spoke with ABC and says he was pleasantly surprised there were not more crowds today. Well, the weather is causing some issues for those who are traveling. Some severe storms have already hammered parts of the Deep South, and the system is moving toward the East Coast. And we're seeing more signs of consumers pulling back on spending, even if you think they could afford it. We get the story from Bloomberg's Nathan Hager.
Over the 3 months leading up to Black Friday, a group of retailers that caters to the upper middle class saw its biggest sales drop in 2 years. That's according to an analysis of Bloomberg's second measure data. That group includes stores like Apple, Nordstrom, and Coach. The slowdown also hit malls in wealthier areas, even as overall retail sales climbed. A senior economist at Morning Consult says people who earn at least $100,000 a year are getting more frugal, and that could be a warning sign for an economy that's counted on consumers to ward off a recession. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 1:30 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Two major developing stories in the business world. Binance Holdings CEO Changpeng Zhao has agreed to plead guilty to anti-money laundering charges, and he will pay a $50 million fine. This during a hearing in Seattle federal court under a sweeping deal worked out with the Justice Department that is designed to keep the company operating. And sources tell Bloomberg Sam Altman and members of the OpenAI board have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and CEO to the artificial intelligence company. We are just under 19 minutes away from the latest Fed meeting. Michael Collins is Senior Portfolio Manager at PGIM Fixed Income.
We do know when the Fed is done, and the Fed is done, that's why the minutes today don't matter. When they're done, rates rally, right? That's the beginning of the rally in the bond market. As soon as the message is clear that the hiking cycle is over, because the markets always overshoot on the upside, and then they overshoot on the downside. So I think we just hit the overshoot at a 5% 10-year, at a 2.5% real yield, and now we're probably on the way down.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Right now, we've got the 10-year yielding 4.43% with a 2-year 4.88%. Stocks are lower across the board. S&P down 9 now, drop there of 0.2%. Dow Industrials down 64, a decline of 0.1%. NASDAQ lower by 96, lower by 0.7%. The big event after the close of trading today, NVIDIA earnings. That stock down now by 1.2%. Spot gold up $20 the ounce to $19.98, up 1%. Bitcoin down 1.4%, 36,900 now on Bitcoin. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3%, 77.63 a barrel. Morgan Stanley co-president Andy Saperstein has been diagnosed with cancer and does plan to keep working as he begins to receive treatment. That word in a memo today to employees. Morgan Stanley shares down 1.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
As we prepare for the debates, not the primary debates that Donald Trump won't show up to, but the real ones, the general election debates. I mean, I guess they're all real, but you know, the actual general election debates run by the Commission on Presidential Debates. We got dates and locations, 3 of them. Texas State University on September 16, that would be number 1. October 1, Virginia State University, and then on the 9th of October, the University of Utah in beautiful Salt Lake City. The question is, who's going to be on the stage? We've talked about this idea. I know Donald Trump is boycotting primary debates now. He has said that he wants to debate Joe Biden. What if Joe Biden decided not to debate Donald Trump because he's been indicted a bunch of times and refused to debate? I don't know. Maybe that happens. Maybe it doesn't. What if the third-party candidates are allowed on stage? If you have an RFK Jr., for instance, polling at 18 or 19%. A lot of questions here, including what the RNC does about this. Remember, they were going to sign a pledge at one point, not take part in these CPD debates. I'm getting confused on how this works because, remember, the moderators were a problem. Let's reassemble the panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano joins. I know we're still wading through the debates of this season, Jeannie, but there's a question, a great article in the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed about the Potemkin Debate Commission, a question about whether it is time to try something new. Debates without moderators. Maybe third-party candidates are on stage this time. What does that stage look like to you?
You know, I do think the idea of rethinking how we do our debates, I really hope we do have them. But I think the idea of rethinking how they're formatted and structured, you know, when I was reading that Wall Street Journal piece, I was thinking, if it's Trump versus Biden and there is no moderator, not that the moderators last time around were able to control it, but I think it would be a big chaotic mess But boy, would it be fascinating. But I do think it is time to rethink this, how this is done. The commission has only been doing this since the mid to late 1980s. It's not as if through all of American history they've existed or they have, any sort of legal reason to be there. And I do think there are, really serious concerns. And we heard some of those expressed on the Republican side. We've heard some expressed on the Democratic side as well. For instance, the choice of the Virginia College is the first historically Black college where we've had a presidential debate. So, there are a lot of questions to address, but I do think we can do it better. That's for certain. The reality is it is really, really important, not just for political junkies that we have them, but that we do try to encourage participation in them, because it is the only time that Americans get the chance to see the 2 or 3, however many people on the stage, people that may be serving as president, have to answer questions, stand up in front of us, talk and engage with each other. I think to be robbed of that would be, to give us, these guys can just hide in their basements for all we know. We don't have to hear from them at all. And of course, we've already seen inklings that both sides wouldn't be that unhappy about that. They'd really very much like to control their image. Debates get them out of that.
What's your thought on all of this, Rick? You've actually done this. You've worked with the commission, and you've helped to negotiate rules around general election, presidential debates. What's it going to be about this time, and what role will Republicans play in shaping that final product?
Yeah, it's a classic every 4 years problem. There's never been a greater disdain, I think, for the presidential commission than exists now. Really, probably on the parts of both candidates.
Is it deserved?
Even in 2000, going back 2008, we tried to avoid the presidential commission debates because they were in horrible locations for the campaign, states that don't matter, where you never campaign. I mean, look at this, for instance, debates going to Texas and Utah. Those are not targeted swing states. Why wouldn't you have the debate in a targeted swing state in an urban center? I mean, come on, are you kidding me? We're going to San Marcos, Texas, and Easton, Pennsylvania. I mean, those wouldn't even rank in the smallest small towns of America. They're tinier than that. And so you scratch your head. In 2015, I participated in the Annenberg Center study on how to democratize the debates, and we gave that report to the commission, and they threw it in the garbage and didn't really do anything with it. So in a SOT this time to the RNC and the complaints that Ronna McDaniel made over a year ago, they did seem to move the timing of the debates up a little bit earlier, from the end of September to the middle of September. Wow, what a SOT to American public and their chance to be able to see these two candidates on the stage together. I'm actually pretty sanguine about the fact that Donald Trump, I think, has gotten used to not debating. If he's the nominee of the party, I'd be surprised if he goes on a stage with Joe Biden.
You would? So these debates might not happen, Rick.
Yeah, well, first of all, they might not happen with the commission themselves, right? There's always an interest on campaigns to set their own rules and not have to abide by some third party who just wants to fundraise on their backs. And then 2, I mean, Donald Trump has done well by not debating. If he is doing well in the campaign by September 15th, why debate?
What do you think, Jeannie? That would be quite the change in precedent here. Maybe they could each do their own ghost empty chair debate or something. There's been talk about no moderators. That's essentially what that would be, isn't it?
Yeah, it would. Let's not forget the second debate in 2020 was canceled. And I think, if I remember correctly, they both scheduled their own sort of battling town halls. So, I think this is very much a real possibility. The reality is that the commission, and it has been under such heavy criticism for so long. And it's the timing, the moderators, the locations, as Rick was just talking about, and everything in between. But the reality is there's so many good ideas out there. The Annenberg study that Rick participated in, they had great ideas. And the fact is the commission hasn't listened to most of those. And that is so very frustrating because, again, I think it's so important for all of us.
Sounds like the commission needs to start listening more on both sides of the aisle. Great conversation. Imagine that. No debates this time. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano with more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Binance Holdings and its CEO Changpeng Zhao have agreed to plead guilty to criminal and civil charges under a deal worked out with the Justice Department. They will also pay a $50 million fine. Zhao agreed to step down a part of the settlement, which included the Treasury Department and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. It has been a tough year for bank stocks, with the KBW Bank Index down about 19% this year. Joanne Feeney is a portfolio manager at Advisors Capital Management. She sees opportunities in the group.
Well, we like several different banks. It depends what you need, again, to round out your portfolio. Some of the big money center banks like a Citi or a JP Morgan, we like both of those. But we also like some of the smaller financials outside of the big money center banks. You know, they got beat up during the financial crisis and they still are beat up. So there are opportunities there. You know, you have to be willing potentially, though, to ride out a recession, because that risk is not off the table, even though it's considerably lower than it once was.
She mentioned JP Morgan Chase, that stock down today by 0.1%. She also mentioned Citigroup, shares of Citigroup down now by about 0.3%. Best Buy's same-store sales fell by more than expected in the third quarter after the retailer called uneven consumer demand. Shares of Best Buy, they are trading lower today by 0.5%. Lowe's has cut its forecast for the second time this year. Lowe's shares down now by 2.8%. Those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
We're live from Washington, where Kaylee Lyons will join us in just 5 minutes' time, and we'll get some final thoughts from Rick and Jeannie, our signature panel, straight ahead. After we get up to date on the news, Nancy Lyons has that world and national news from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. President Biden says he has spoken with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Emir of Qatar about hostages being held by Hamas and the possibility of a deal.
We're now very close, very close. We could bring some of these hostages home very soon, but I don't want to get into the details of things because nothing is done until it's done.
Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian tells us the agreement could be announced as soon as today.
The Israeli cabinet is meeting today, and they're expected to discuss this deal that's been in the works for weeks, and we don't have any indications this is going to be an obstacle. It seems like more of a rubber stamp, so we'll see. I mean, these kind of negotiations are very fragile. They can always fall apart at the last minute, but all indications are it's moving forward and could be finalized as soon as today.
Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian in Washington. New York Governor Kathy Hochul says due to the heightened threat environment over the war between Israel and Hamas, social media teams are not doing enough to combat hate. So she's announced funding to provide college campuses with online threat assessment and management teams.
These teams are working to identify violent threats. They're not looking at your Instagram sunset post or your tweets about your favorite football team. And they're not here to penalize anyone for their political views.
Hochul says the teams will find those with radical views and provide them with an off-ramp like mental health counseling. Walmart says it's working closely with investigators to try to determine why a shooter opened fire at one of its stores in Ohio and wounded 4 people before killing himself. The attack was reported last night at the Walmart in Beaver Creek, which is a town about 50,000 in the Dayton area. The shooting happened a day after 2 people were shot and killed outside a Walmart in South Anchorage, Alaska. Police there are still searching for a suspect. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Joe.
One endorsement that apparently Joe Biden will not be getting in the re-election campaign. You can say goodbye to the Cardi B vote. This just emerging in the last 24 hours, as I'm sure Rick and Jeannie have been obsessing over this. The rapper and actor taking to, was it Facebook Live, Instagram Live, probably doesn't matter, in a expletive-laced rant that I can't read or play for you here. But the fact of the matter is she's declining to endorse the Democrat in this case because of a couple of issues that she outlines. Budget cuts in New York City, where there's, of course, a migrant crisis, She says we're going to be drowning with rats. We're going to have our budget cut. I really can't have to choose my words here. But also calling out the Biden administration, questioning how the U.S. can send aid to, quote, fund two wars, while New York City's departments and agencies lose their budget. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano didn't think we'd be talking Cardi B today, but I suspect, Jeannie, she does speak for some Democrats. What is the Cardi B demographic?
I don't know if I'm the person to say, but I was confused by some of what she said. But I do think she does express the viewpoint of young people out there and people across the country who need more explanation as to why we are spending so much money abroad and not at home. But with these very simplistic ideas, like, you know, the federal government funds New York City, which is obviously not true.
Yeah, right.
So there's a lot of this isn't true. But
well, I guess with regard to the migrant policy, that could be different. But I don't know, Rick, we can joke around with it. It is Cardi B after all. But does Joe Biden have something to worry about here? This gets us back to the whole talk about young voters.
Yeah, look, at least she didn't criticize him for being
show in politics. Kaylee's coming in next. Hour 2 of Sound On starts right now.
Now, from our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
Two major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover them.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
The president says a deal to free hostages in Gaza is very close. And we're getting encouraging news now from Egypt as well. Welcome to Hour 2 of Sound On, as Joe Biden hopes for news before he leaves Washington for the holiday here. We're going to look at the elements of a possible deal that could emerge as soon as today and discuss with Congressman Brad Sherman, the Democrat from California. Of course, also no fan of crypto, and will weigh in on the Justice Department's multi-billion-dollar settlement today with Binance. Later on, we'll run odds on a government shutdown with Nathan Dean from Bloomberg Intelligence. And we'll talk to Bloomberg's national security reporter Dan Flatley as a new front opens in the conflict with China over chips. All that after a look at Wall Street. We get an update on trading for you now. Live from New York, here's Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. Breaking now, the Fed minutes are out. All on the FOMC agreed to, quote, proceed carefully on rates. All on the FOMC saw rates remaining restrictive for some time. And the Fed also sees further tightening if inflation progress remains insufficient. So again, repeating the top headline here, all members of the FOMC agreed to, quote, proceed carefully on rates. Right now we have got the 10-year yielding 4.43% with the 2-year, 4.89%. Stocks do remain lower across the board. S&P down 8 right now. That is a drop of 0.2%. Dow Industrials down 66, a decline there of 0.2%. NASDAQ down 88, a decline of 0.6%. Again, the 10-year right now, 4.43%. Spot gold up $20 the ounce at $19.98, higher by 1%. West Texas Intermediate crude lower, a little change, down 0.1% right now, 77.74 a barrel. Binance Holdings CEO Changpeng Zhao has agreed to plead guilty to anti-money laundering charges and pay a $50 million fine. This during a hearing in Seattle federal court today under a sweeping deal worked out with the Justice Department that is designed to keep the company operating. And the other major story we're following, sources tell Bloomberg Sam Altman and members of the OpenAI board have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and CEO to the AI company. Sales of previously owned homes fell by the most in nearly a year in October, highlighting the toll elevated mortgage rates and still high prices continue to take on the resale market. The National Association of Realtors said contract closings decreased 4.1% from a month earlier. Lawrence Yoon is Group Senior VP for Research, and he told Bloomberg lower mortgage rates are what's needed to get housing moving again.
Now, of course, we're not going to get back to the mortgage rates of 3 or 4%, but if the mortgage rates was to say come down closer to 6% next year, I think there will be many home sellers who have been delaying their move. They have additional child in the family, maybe they turn 65, looking towards retirement years. All this delay in potential sales, I think, will begin to appear next year.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Bloomberg Talks podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Again, repeating our top story, Fed minutes are out. They show that all on the FOMC agreed to proceed carefully on rates. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Right, Charlie, thank you. Welcome to Hour 2 of Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, keying off Charlie Pellet's double-pointed departure. We also invite you to join us on YouTube. You'd never believe the things that happen in the studio, like Charlie Pellet. Search Bloomberg Global News. You'll find Kaylee Lyons as well. Nice to see you, Kaylee, who, of course, is with us for the second hour of Sound On every day. We've got breaking news, as Charlie mentioned, on a couple of fronts, actually. We're going to talk about all of these with Congressman Brad Sherman. To review quickly here, the Fed making news here, and it does seem like they're all singing the same tune.
Yeah, essentially that they do intend to keep rates restrictive. Obviously, the conversation with the Fed very much has turned from a question as to whether or not the Fed could intend to hike rates further. It seems like they likely will not, but they're leaving the door open to doing so if they need to. It becomes a question of how long they have to keep rates high. And really the key paragraph here from the minutes is that participants judged it was critical that the stance of monetary policy be kept sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to the 2% objective, and they could proceed carefully. But the idea here is that rates could stay restrictive for some time.
Yes,
Joe.
right. And you should see what it's like to sit near Kaylee when the minutes come out. Just like a bead right down to the 7th paragraph where the goods are. Thank you for that. We'll talk to Brad Sherman about that. He wears a couple of important hats for us here when it comes to foreign affairs and financial services.
Yeah.
And in terms of geopolitics today, we're waiting for a breaker. It hasn't happened yet, but the headlines are becoming more encouraging. Egypt now, as a read on the terminal, Egypt's foreign press office citing progress in hostage talks. This is happening as we speak. The president talked about it earlier today at an unrelated event. It was a counter-narcotics event he was holding, and he opened with this. You can tell how important it is to him. Here's Joe Biden from earlier.
We've been working on this intensively for weeks, as you all know. I've spoken recently about it with both the Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Emir of Qatar. And my team has been in the region shuttling between capitals. We're now very close. We could bring some of these hostages home very soon.
Very soon, the word, Kaylee, that we hear from the president, not unlike what he said yesterday on the rope line, leading us to believe truly this could, I guess, happen any minute.
Yeah, we know that the Israeli cabinet is going to be assembling this evening. It does seem like the indication is this could be a decision that is announced on the side of Israel and Hamas rather than coming directly from the White House. But we're essentially just waiting for news. And literally, Joe, it could come any minute.
Well, that's where we begin our conversation with Brad Sherman. The gentleman from California is with us, of course, Democrat from the 32nd District. I love California. Congressman, it's good to see you. As we hear from the president today, and we understand that this agreement could take on a couple of phases, I wonder your thoughts on this idea of releasing, I believe, 3 Palestinian prisoners for 1 Israeli hostage. Is that what we need now?
Well, Israel, being a democracy, is certainly very vulnerable when hostages are taken. There are overwhelming political pressures to get the hostages back. When this happened, I was not sure they would get any of them back. And when a soldier, Khalid Shalit, about a decade ago, was part of an exchange. It was 1,000 to 1 ratio, close to that. So I I think it matters a lot who is being released by Israel. And of course, some of those released a decade ago are on the front lines and planning some of the worst attacks against Israel this time. The 5-day ceasefire, I think, makes sense. It's a chance to resupply and to provide humanitarian aid. And I think it shows that those who called for a ceasefire without any hostage release turned out to be wrong, because we'll get the 5-day ceasefire with the hostage release.
Well, you say, Congressman, that the ceasefire is an opportunity to resupply in terms of humanitarian aid going into Gaza, but theoretically it also is an opportunity for Hamas to resupply and regroup as well. I just wonder, there has to be an offset here, right? For the release of the hostages to broker this kind of pause in the fighting, at the very least for a number of days, does it risk potentially exacerbating the conflict as it moves forward?
This will make it more difficult for Israel to achieve its military objectives. It will create more danger for Israel Defense Forces soldiers. But if 50 hostages are released, I think that's a decision that Israel will make.
This would come with apparently a second phase as well, Congressman, that could see up to another 50 Israeli hostages released in exchange for a longer ceasefire. What are you comfortable with there when we talk about a longer-term ceasefire, and could that be the start of a more meaningful peace agreement?
Well, to get a meaningful peace agreement, Hamas would have to renounce its own charter and say that it wants to live alongside Israel, rather than their current charter, which calls for them to kill every Jew between the river and the sea, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. I think that at the same time, I think the whole world wants this violence to end. And if we could negotiate a two-state solution, that would be an outstanding outcome. But I don't know how long a second ceasefire would last, nor do I know how that would impact Israeli military operations. But ultimately, Hamas also are able to alleviate civilian suffering. That is a good result as well.
Well, of course, Congressman, some of these hostages in question are Americans. We know that the administration has been working very closely in this effort. Yet we have also seen, as recently as this week, polling that indicates there is a great deal of disapproval with the Biden administration's handling of this conflict. In fact, there are more that disapprove of what Biden has done in regard to this war between Israel and Hamas. What, if anything, should the administration change here? How much power realistically does it have to influence the decisions of Israel at this moment?
Well, I did my own poll at my last town hall. Well over 50% approved of how Biden was handling this. And what was interesting is equal numbers, about 20% on each side, disapproved, but for different reasons. 20% thought he should be more pro-Palestine, and the other 20% thought he should be more pro-Israel. And I think that's what's reflected whenever you ask, do people approve? They may disapprove for a variety of different reasons. But ultimately, people want to live in a peaceful world. They hold the President of the United States responsible for whether things are going well in the world. And obviously, things aren't going well in the Middle East. October 6th was a peaceful day, and it hasn't been peaceful since. So I think when people reflect on it, they'll realize that it's not the responsibility of the American president to gather intelligence on Hamas. That was primarily the responsibility of the Israeli government, and that no president can guarantee that there aren't foreign crises. Now that this crisis has developed, and we'd feel better about Biden if it hadn't developed. But now that it's developed, the question is, how well are we reacting to it? And I think the president is handling it very well, supporting Israel, and at the same time trying to protect civilian lives.
We're spending time with Congressman Brad Sherman, the Democrat from California, with us on Bloomberg Live today. Congressman, the matter of funding to support Israel is a whole separate conversation, and it's one that you're going to have to face again when Congress gets back into session following Thanksgiving. Your new speaker sees things differently than the White House and the Senate, for that matter, and brought, of course, Israel funding to the floor as a standalone. I wonder what you're hearing, if there's any path forward to get this done by the end of the year, either as a standalone or coupled with Ukraine and the rest.
I think the president has an excellent package of aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine, humanitarian assistance for a number of problems around the world, and additional money to be spent at the border. I'd like to vote for it all as one bill, but if it's brought up in 2 or 3 bills at the House floor, we could pass them all separately. Biden could sign them together. What we can't see is a situation where you pit Israel aid on the one hand with domestic needs on the other. Because if we're ever in a situation where, in order to vote to provide defense assistance to Israel, you have to vote to cut food stamps or the IRS or any domestic program, that sets Israel up for eventually a failure in the United States Congress. And I'll point out that the speaker trying to finance aid to Israel by cutting IRS audits in the view of the Congressional Budget Office, and I think almost all observers, had the effect of doubling to tripling the cost. You don't offset the cost by reducing audits. And
so clearly, Congressman, the House... I'm sorry to interrupt you. Obviously, the House has a lot of work.
I headed the second largest tax agency in the country for 5 years, so I have a little background on the importance of audits. Go ahead.
I know you have a lot you're focusing on in that body, and you will be when you return to Washington as a body next week. I do, though, want to touch on the news of today because it relates to a subject I know that you very much like to talk about. That would be crypto. There is a deal between the DOJ, Treasury, the CFTC, related to Binance and CZ. That deal including CZ, who, of course, is the CEO and founder of that exchange, pleading guilty to criminal charges and stepping down. Do you think that's adequate, sir, that settlement?
It might be for that particular case, but ultimately we cannot have crypto become a medium of exchange, especially as it's designed. I mean, the very name says cryptocurrency means hidden money. And when you have unhosted wallets, when those wallets are anonymous, where you cannot know your customer because your customer is just a vague number, you have a system that can prosper only if it captures the biggest market for hidden money, which is tax evasion. Not that there aren't also other important markets, sanctions evasion, drug dealing, hiding money from spouses in divorce matters, et cetera. And so I don't see a need for another currency except if you need hidden currency for all those purposes I identified. When Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested, I pointed out that the crypto world was telling us Sam Bankman-Fried was just one snake in a garden of Eden. The fact is, crypto is a garden of snakes.
Last question for you in our final moment then, Congressman. What should happen to CZ?
I'm not involved in the details of that. So I don't really have an opinion.
It's good to see you again. Brad Sherman, the congressman from California. We thank you for being with us on Bloomberg. Never one to shy away from a comment on crypto, Kaylee.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And of course, there'll be a lot more conversation on crypto throughout the day today, Joe, as at 3 p.m. we are expecting a joint press conference with Merrick Garland, of course, the Attorney General, and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. I would just point out that though there has been a settlement with Treasury, DOJ, and the CFTC, there's still an ongoing SEC case, civil charges that have been brought against Binance, and those would not theoretically be resolved by this agreement. So this is far from over, which means I'm going to keep talking about it.
Yeah.
Make you talk about it here on Sound On, Joe.
You know, Nathan Dean's going to come in next. So I suspect we're going to get into this again.
Yep.
Is his Financial Services Committee going to do something about crypto next year?
Well, they passed the bills out of committee. It becomes a question of whether the whole House is going to bring this to the floor. But of course, they have a lot of other work they have to do. So I'm not sure where this is on the ranking of priorities.
Got to fund the government and that stuff.
Yeah.
All right, we'll talk to Dad about it next. Nathan Dean from Bloomberg Intelligence and his voice of reason here on Sound On. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Binance Holdings CEO Changpeng Zhao, CZ, has pleaded guilty to anti-money laundering violations and agreed to pay a $50 million fine under a sweeping deal worked out with the Justice Department that is designed to keep the company operating. Democratic California Congressman Brad Sherman was a guest moments ago right here on Sound On, and he was asked about the deal and the larger crypto backdrop.
When Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested, I pointed out that the crypto world was telling us Sam Bankman-Fried was just one snake in a garden of Eden. The fact is, crypto is a garden of snakes.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Sound On podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Sources tell Bloomberg Sam Altman and members of the OpenAI board have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and CEO to the artificial intelligence company. Stocks, bonds, and the dollar all saw small moves after the Federal Reserve reiterated its cautious approach on rates. Traders are also waiting NVIDIA's results after the close of trading. NVIDIA shares down now by 0.8%. Stocks are lower across the board. The S&P 500 index down 9 now to 4537, a drop of 0.2%. Dow Industrials down 78, also a decline of 0.2%. Nasdaq down 90, that is a drop of 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.42% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.88%. Gold up 1% right now, higher by $21 the ounce to $19.99. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.2%, 77.68 a barrel. Briefly, Ford Motor is reducing capacity and hiring plans at a battery plant it is building in Michigan because it sees weaker demand for electric vehicles. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Keely Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks for being with us on the fastest show in politics. We've heard that line before from Brad Sherman. Sam Bankman-Fried was not, Kaylee, help me with this, just a snake in the Garden of Eden.
Yes. Crypto is a garden of snakes.
Perfect. Thank God you're here. Okay, so what does that say about CZ then? Does that reinforce his point? And what are we going to learn at 3 o'clock from the DOJ and the authorities here in Washington?
Well, they're probably going to confirm what we already know, which is that the DOJ, along with the Treasury and the CFTC, has reached a deal with Binance after years of an investigation into Binance, which is the world's largest crypto exchange. They're going to settle it with the tune of $4.3 billion in fines that will be paid, and CZ himself pleading guilty to charges including money laundering and resigning or removing himself as the chief executive of Binance. Theoretically, though, with this deal, Binance could continue to operate.
How about him?
Well, that remains the question. Even if he's not in charge, does he still get to keep the company, keep his majority share in it? And it appears that may happen.
Could he be in more trouble beyond this settlement?
Well, there's still an ongoing SEC case. That's
so that's
civil charges that have been brought against Binance, and those wouldn't be resolved by this deal.
Fascinating. It's run it by Dad. Nathan Dean joins from Bloomberg Intelligence, Washington senior policy analyst, right? I got that right. I didn't look. Nice to see you, Nathan Dean. We have this conversation every week at this time. You must be, to stick with the dad theme, very disappointed in CZ.
Well, look, I mean, the whole point about the CZ settlement that we're looking at is what does this mean for regulatory clarity going forward? Because if Binance comes out of this way in a way that they can operate, they at least get some idea of what the roadmap for regulations will be. Look, I don't think we're going to get that at 3 p.m., but over the next few weeks and so forth, we want to see what the operating parameters for Binance is, because there are other equities at stake, Coinbase, for example. And what we are telling our clients, though, is that we really don't think this is changing the narrative for a crypto policy legislation to make its way through Congress, because Kaylee, on your show all the time, you like to show that, you know, there's a lot of not small, significant number of people that are for a crypto framework. There's the same amount of people that are against a crypto framework. And it's just one of those arguments that really hasn't had any momentum. This could be it. We still think a stablecoin bill can get through next year, but that's about as far as you can go. The big question will be, what does this deal say? How does Binance operate moving forward? Is there any implications for Coinbase, and what is former acting Speaker McHenry want to do with his FIT bill?
Wow, that was a flashback
Wow,
for a second.
it feels like it was like a year ago that McHenry temporarily
got a
had
facial
the gavel.
tick for a second.
So much has happened between now and then already. To your point, though, on kind of the regulatory congressional questions, Commissioner of the SEC, Hester Peirce, joined us earlier on Bloomberg Television on the crypto show. I asked her what Binance theoretically would mean, this settlement with the criminal charges for the SEC's civil case, and she basically just said, can't answer that, but as these things move forward, she really hopes that they're thinking proactively about building a regulatory framework that could work. In the interim, though, if Congress can't actually get that regulatory framework through in terms of market structure, this is going to be the courts that decide this.
Exactly. So, I mean, if I could take the optimistic view of a crypto advocate here, what you could say is, look, this is just another catalyst event that's going to give us some form of clarity. You know, you'll have court cases coming up. My colleague Elliot Stein covers Ripple, and, you know, we saw one with Kraken that just came out yesterday. Each one of those courts, you know, catalyst events will bring us some form of clarity. Eventually, it could get to the point where it pushes Congress to do something, because, look, if Congress does nothing, a lot of people can say, fine, we're not going to do anything. It's not really our issue. Then the courts are going to figure it out for you. And if the courts figure it out for you, you may not get the answer that you want, especially if the SEC begins to lose quite a bit of these court cases. So I think there will come a point eventually that Congress sort of has this debate. Do we need to jump in here? Do we need to do something like take a look at Patrick McHenry's FIT Act, if you will, and see if we can actually pass anything? I just don't think that can happen in 2024. The question is, will the courts do enough before then?
Yeah, this is a Congress that can't figure out how to fund the government. And I wonder if the conventional wisdom is aligned with your own projections at Bloomberg Intelligence when it comes down to a quote-unquote inevitable shutdown in the new year.
Yeah, so we're pretty high. I think we say 70% chance for a shutdown January 19th. As for the listeners remembering, there's a laddered CR out here. 4 out of the 12 appropriation bills go on January 19th. The other 8 go on February 2nd. You know, we just don't think that the importance of those 4 appropriation bills raises to the level that's going to push Congress to avoid a shutdown.
So not a good strategy.
No, well, I mean, but it's also, what is the political strategy here? Because if Speaker Johnson needs a shutdown to placate some members of his own party, a small partial shutdown could be a positive spin for him. I'm not calling it positive for the people who work in those agencies, but, you know, it could be a ploy to say, you know what, we've had our shutdown, we've fought and so forth, but it only didn't impact it it didn't impact the Department of Defense. That February 2nd date, though, is the key date, and you know, it's too early to really tell where we're going, but, you know, we do think a shutdown and some type of friction is going to happen.
Well, I wonder if we could be looking at a scenario realistically where you do get the partial shutdown on January 19th. You don't get the other part on February 2nd, but there's a lot of conflict in trying to resolve the end of the shutdown of the first tranche. It just feels like there's so many moving parts that there's different ways that it could get messy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what we're telling our also clients is that, you know, for shutdowns, the equity impacts aren't all that great, but there are a significant number of reports, specifically the U.S. Department of Agriculture, for example, that goes in that January 19th. So if you're a commodities trader, you may be operating for a few weeks without those reports as that gets fixed. You know, obviously the Fed is important. A lot of the government data goes into Fed decisions. So even though the Fed won't shut down because they operate independently, a lot of the data they use goes into.
So partial shutdown to a total something shutdown in February. I guess
to shut the down comes later. I don't know.
Yeah, that's strange. We'll navigate that when we get to it. Mike Johnson had dinner at Mar-a-Lago last night. That change your odds?
Well, no. You know, the challenge that Speaker Johnson faces is eventually he's going to have to fight. You know, the House Freedom Caucus wants him to fight, and eventually he's going to have to do that. I think Speaker Johnson is trying to figure out when and what is the best way for me to have that fight. And maybe using the laddered CR approach, I'll have that fight for those first 4 appropriation bills, and that will placate the House Freedom Caucus, those people that want the shutdown. But ultimately, I think he's still trying to figure out what that plan is. He's got lots of time because even though January 19th will be sooner before we know it, he still has the month of December and so forth. And, you know, there's really not much else in the horizon between now and then. And then, you know, so I think it's just more intel and information gathering from him at this point.
I want to go back to what you were saying about how there'll be a lot of commodities information that commodities traders may not have in light of a shutdown. Gets me thinking about the ag space. Where's the farm bill? in this. When does that get done? I know you have some research out on that too.
Yeah, so the Farm Bill was extended as part of this most recent CR 1 year to September 30th, 2024. Now, we're telling our clients that there's two ways to look at it. One is the equity side. So you have SNAP benefits, $1.2 trillion over 10 years. Yep. This is actually really important for the grocery stores and the big box retailers that accept SNAP benefits. The good news is that the SNAP benefits won't change. And then by the time we get to September, nobody's going to try and cut SNAP benefits right before an election. And so I think from the grocery store equity perspective, you're okay. From the commodities side, though, it gets a little bit different because this is where a lot of the negotiations were taking place. Now, generally, the Senate Ag Committee and the House Ag Committees are pretty bipartisan, but we still haven't seen text yet. They're still negotiating over specific programs. And there are commodity traders like looking at maybe the dairy margin coverage program and so forth like that. You know, these are small programs, but they are important to those specific commodities. So, it's really just depending on which program is up for the chopping block and where Senator Stabenow is and so forth like that. The commodity side is where I think more of the concern of what could happen in the long term for the Farm Bill.
Quick dad check on Thanksgiving etiquette. Will you allow politics at the table on Thursday?
I plan every year to tell my 9-year-old that I don't believe Anna and Elsa are real princesses, and that's where we get started.
So that's pretty heavy stuff if you're going to roll that out. 6 out of 10, tell Quinnipiac.
Going after Frozen? Really?
Yeah, that's pretty heavy.
So I can get the reaction.
Wow. That doesn't come close to politics. I can't beat that. Thank you, and happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
Thanksgiving.
Nathan Dean with us on Bloomberg. 6 out of 10. Kaylee's not going there. It's all football, right?
Yes.
It's only my crazy table.
Yeah.
All right, world and national news now with Nancy Lyons. Let's do that from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. The Biden administration is speaking confidently the world will see the remaining hostages held captive by Hamas militants October 7th will soon be free, at least some of those hostages. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller.
At this point, everything is not yet final, but we are close.
Miller says any deal would unlock the potential for more humanitarian assistance into Gaza. Bloomberg Sound On spoke with Daniel Freed, who's a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council, a former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, and former ambassador to Poland. He says this deal could serve as a stepping stone to peace.
This possible deal for hostages and a temporary ceasefire could be a first step, but that's a small first step, and the steps after this get harder, not easier.
Ambassador Freed believes the U.S. is likely involved in these hostage negotiations. Well, the great holiday exodus is underway. For those who are traveling by car, you will see lower prices at the pump. According to AAA, the national average for a gallon of regular gas is about $3.31. That's 25 cents less than a month ago, 36 cents less than a year ago. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
connection lost.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A number of developing stories at this hour. Binance Holdings CEO Changpeng Zhao, CZ, has pleaded guilty to anti-money laundering violations and has agreed to pay a $50 million fine under a sweeping deal worked out with the Justice Department that is designed to keep the company operating. Sources tell Bloomberg's Sam Altman and members of the OpenAI board have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and chief executive officer to the artificial intelligence company. Stocks are trading lower on this Fed Minutes Tuesday. We've got the S&P down 10 now, a drop there of 0.2%. Dow Industrial is down 82, also a decline of 0.2%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index is down 91 points, a drop right now of 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.42% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.88%. Spot gold back above $2,000, barely $2,000.20, up $22 the ounce. That's a gain right now of 1.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is little change now, down by 1 cent. Well, some of the other stories that we're following for you at this hour, Morgan Stanley co-president Andy Saperstein has been diagnosed with cancer and does plan to keep working as he begins to receive treatment. That word this morning in a memo to employees. Morgan Stanley shares, they are down by 1.4%. Again, recapping, stocks are lower, S&P down 10, a drop of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
So, Kaylee, the whole world is going to stop in a couple of hours here when NVIDIA releases quarterly earnings. This is, of course, the granddaddy of AI stocks and AI companies. People call it a chip maker. That's actually not really fair, right? They make these GPUs, which are much more complex. And this is what we're trying to keep out of the hands of China, because those are the cards, if you will, that you need to power the programs and computers that generate AI.
Right.
They pretty much have a corner on the market.
Yeah, they do. They have the first mover advantage. It really is a question for NVIDIA of being able to have enough supply to meet demand. But there are questions as well around how U.S. policy factors into it. As you say, a lot of this technology is trying to be kept out of China's hands. There are export controls that affect NVIDIA in place. And it'll be interesting to hear how the company comments around this on the call. Knowing that the bar is set so high for them, this is a stock that is up 240% on a year-to-date basis. So they need to achieve a lot. I just wonder how they dance around the China question.
Well, especially as a new front opens, from what I'm hearing. And we've already heard there have been some tough days for NVIDIA shares, realizing it's all the way back to its highs. But some of the more volatile days have been when headlines, to your point, of restricting access in China come about. And we know that impacts some orders that they had. This has been rippling through the whole industry. Dan Flatley is reporting on the next front, though, which I find fascinating. It's like the The Graduate. It's not plastics, Dan, it's packaging. What are we, welcome, by the way, Dan Flatley, always welcome at the table here from Bloomberg's National Security Desk. What are we talking about when we refer to packaging in the semiconductor space?
Basically, we're talking about sort of the process of taking these sophisticated chips and encasing them and bringing them together in order to increase processing speed, increase performance. So we're not talking about developing more advanced chips. We're just kind of talking about stacking them together and making them do the things that we all want to do faster. Look at Instagram, look at Twitter, look at Facebook, look at what's the other one? Forget it's the big one, the most popular
Truth
one.
Social. No, sorry.
It's past my age bracket.
Twitter, Facebook. Come on.
Wait, what have you not listed already?
TikTok. Thank you.
TikTok. Yes.
Which brings its own
I mean,
whole
that's
host
its own,
of other issues.
we don't want to get into that.
No,
It's a whole other
speaking of
national
banning
security
things
conversation. But
with China.
Yeah.
Okay, so who's doing this packaging? Is this something China is doing and the U.S. is trying to make it so that they can't do it? How does this work?
Right. So I think a lot of this goes back to, I don't know if you remember the Mate Pro 60, the Huawei phone, and the
China-made chip.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of this kind of goes back to that and how that was sort of caught everybody off guard. Like, where did this performance come from? And so the Biden administration, in unveiling its sort of tech strategy to counter China over the last couple of years, has really focused on advanced chips and all these export controls and even the lithography machines that make the chips. And they really felt like they had a ring fence around China's ability to create this kind of performance in the phones that we all use every day. But what happened with the Mate 60 Pro, which really caught everybody off guard, is China was able to do that anyway. Yeah. And so that's kind of where we get to this discussion of advanced manufacturing, advanced packaging, because we're trying to understand and limit China's ability to do even that, which is much harder because you don't need the most sophisticated chips. You don't need the most sophisticated technology. You just need to have enough of them and to be able to produce them at scale to basically get the same kind of performance. So it's something that's sort of a workaround, but much harder to get at.
That chip technology that got to SMIC in China was traced back to an applied materials piece of equipment in Massachusetts, a chip-making piece of equipment. It's got to be a remarkable cloak and dagger story. You'll probably write the book at some point, Dan, but I wonder, what is it like for a company like NVIDIA? They must be working hand in hand with the government. The security must be beyond anything we've ever seen in the private sector. To what extent does the government expect them to meet standards when it comes to privacy and security, or are they helping in that case?
Well, I think it's always tricky when you start to talk about how the government is interacting with private enterprise. And that's one of the things that has come up in a lot of these export control rules because, and not just with China, but with regard to Russia and Ukraine as well, because there are U.S.-made chips that are showing up on the battlefield in Ukraine. There are, we know from some of our reporting on the spy balloon, for instance, earlier this year, that there were some parts with English writing that were found among the debris there. Yeah. So you have a product, much like oil, that everybody around the world wants. And when there's that much demand, there's going to be some leakage and there's going to be some illicit trade. There's going to be just some stuff that you can't keep an eye on every single element of this. So as far as what the government can do, they can put the word out to companies that this is something that is very important. They can certainly have export controls and fines for export control violations. But until you really put the companies on notice and somebody gets hit with a big fine, like in the sanctions space when you have billion-dollar fines happening and things like that, and companies are really saying, okay, we need to be extra careful, it's difficult for companies to know exactly where the line is because they can walk right up to that. You know, if they're selling to a supplier in Southeast Asia, they don't necessarily know that that's going to go to China. I mean, so it's a complicated situation.
Just because you mentioned sanctions violations, and we're now roughly 12 minutes away from what's supposed to be a press conference between Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and Treasury Secretary Jenny Yellen on Binance. There were 3 counts in what dropped. Part of it's money laundering. And again, CZ, the CEO and founder of Binance, is expected to plead guilty to these criminal charges. But the other part was sanctions violations and terrorist financing to at least some degree. How does the U.S. government look at this case, Dan?
Well, I think that this is an important case for the U.S. government writ large because you're talking about the largest crypto exchange in the world. And the U.S. government has not really decided how it's going to regulate crypto, whether it's going to be a commodity, whether it's going to be security, all of that sort of thing playing out in the background. In the meantime, these enforcement agencies are looking at the risks in the crypto space and seeing a lot of connections between crypto and illicit finance and some of these terrorist groups and so on and so forth. But it's not like they can come out and say all crypto is bad, right? Because that would not be the government's role, and they don't want to restrict innovation and things like that. So they have to kind of take a little bites of the apple here and there. And I think, again, if you see big fines coming out of these actions, what that is indicating to the crypto space is basically police yourselves, or we're gonna do the job for you. So I think that is something that you're going to see most likely with this press conference today, and something that we can expect to see a little bit more of in this space. Sure.
Joe, I know at least one member of government who is willing to say all crypto is bad. That would be Congressman Brad Sherman, who was on this program
just talk to him
earlier.
Every time he's here.
We take your point, Dan.
Yeah. Well, it's
Garden of Snakes,
Pardon
Dan.
for me.
Garden of Snakes. Dan Flatley, great job, great reporting. I suspect you're going to be paying attention to this announcement in 10 minutes, so thanks for making us part of your day. Bloomberg's national security reporter, always a fascinating conversation with Dan Flatley. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Binance Holdings CEO Changpeng Zhao has pleaded guilty to anti-money laundering violations and agreed to pay a $50 million fine under a sweeping deal worked out with the Justice Department designed to keep the company operating. Zoom Video Communications reported better than expected revenue on strong enterprise sales. That's stock up right now by 0.1%. Broadcom's $61 billion takeover of software maker VMware has won approval from Chinese regulators, albeit with a list of conditions that it has to fulfill. And with more on the story, here's Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
Charlie, it represents the final hurdle for the company's $61 billion merger. The conditions are tied to how the companies sell their products in the Chinese market, including making sure VMware's server software is interoperable with local hardware. The Chinese state market regulator said it'll approve the deal if they've met and that it has the right to supervise and inspect the company's adherence to the restrictions. The combination of the U.S. chip maker and cloud software company, one of the biggest technology mergers ever, and has already received clearances from the EU, the UK, South Korea, and Japan. Charlie?
And that is Tom Busby reporting. Best Buy's same-store sales fell by more than expected in the third quarter after the retailer called uneven consumer demand. That weakness led to the chain to cut its annual forecast for sales and profitability. Best Buy shares, they're down now by 1.8%. Those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from Washington and keeping you up to date with world and national news. Nancy Lyons has that from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Joe. Israel's cabinet has been meeting to discuss a possible deal with Hamas to release some of the hostages in return for the release of Palestinian prisoners who are being held by Israel. The State Department's Matthew Miller is sounding hopeful.
We are very close to an agreement, but we are not there yet. As you have heard us say a number of times over the course of the past few weeks, nothing is final until everything is final. And at this point, everything is not yet final, but we are close.
Again, the State Department's Matthew Miller. The developments come as international pressure grows on Israel to end its more than 6-week retaliatory offensive in Gaza, which authorities in the Hamas-run enclave say has killed more than 13,000 people and triggered a humanitarian crisis. Well, it is a busy travel week with more than 55 million people expected to travel at least 50 miles from home for Thanksgiving. Most travelers will be driving to their destinations. Experts say the worst time to be on the road will be between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Wednesday. And as Bloomberg's Liliana Byington reports, transportation officials are hoping flight disruptions will be kept to a minimum.
The transportation department is saying that one thing they're going to be doing to lower the delays that you're going to see is if the schedules get messed up, they're going to try to make sure that the commercial airplanes that you're taking are able to leave first over private jets.
Byington says the Federal Aviation Administration is estimating there will be almost 50,000 flights tomorrow, which would surpass last year's numbers. Fans of the Rolling Stones will get some satisfaction next year. The Rock and Roll Hall of Famers announced they will hit 16 cities across North America, beginning in April. The Hackney Diamonds Tour will kick off April 28th in Houston and visit cities including New Orleans, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Denver, Chicago, Boston, and New York City. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Joe and Kaylee.
All right, Nancy, thank you. I hope they're coming to Washington. I mean, got to do that
go
here,
see it?
right? 100%, yeah. They're coming to Washington. I mean, got to do that
go
here,
see it?
right? 100%, yeah. This would be the last chance, I think. Producer Matt will be there. He'll get tickets for all of us. The presidential debates are another question, and by that I mean the big ones, the general election debates. Kaylee, you saw we got cities and dates on these two. Texas State University, the first one will be September 16. Virginia State University, October 1, and the University of Utah, October 9. And there are questions about to what extent the Republican National Committee will be involved in these. But
right.
The debate that I can speak to you more about now that we have details on is the one with Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom.
We've been waiting for this one.
Yeah. They came out with the final stuff last night. The Great Red versus Blue State debate, 90 minutes. It'll be moderated by Sean Hannity, and there will be no audience, which is something I guess that Gavin Newsom was demanding. This is going to be more fun than the actual primary debates, right?
Well, you know, in the primary debates, you have to pause for the audience making noises, the candidates trying to talk
much
through
more
that,
performative.
talk through each other, the moderators trying to get control. This is just going to be 3 individuals involved in this thing. And I just wonder, if you're Ron DeSantis and you're actively campaigning to be president, Gavin Newsom does not have that on his back, even if he may eventually have presidential
He'd like to, maybe.
ambitions. It just feels like the stakes are different for each of them
is your
here.
point there?
Yeah.
100%. He's also, Ron DeSantis is also challenging Donald Trump to a one-on-one on Newsmax. And since Donald Trump hasn't shown up for any of the primary debates yet, we don't think that will happen. We're still waiting for news here on Israel. There's a very good chance that we will have a hostage deal announced today, Kaylee, but this has remained elusive for this White House. The president says we're very close.
And we are hearing from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the start of a cabinet meeting. He says the war will continue after a pause for the hostage exchange. Unclear if that means the deal has ultimately been reached, but of course we'll continue to bring you the details as we have.
Yeah, you said it. Stick with Bloomberg on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube for the latest. With Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. Bloomberg Business Week starts now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio, YouTube, and, of course, Bloomberg Originals. It is Tuesday, November 21st. A lot going on. It feels like it should be the 22nd already because there's so much going on.
So much for a quiet Thanksgiving week, Carol.
Taint happening, everybody.
No. Hey, it's only Tuesday, so it could get quiet.
It's only Tuesday, Lemon. We are awaiting a DOJ press conference to announce separate but related cryptocurrency enforcement actions. We already know Binance CEO and founder Changpeng Zhao already pleading guilty to anti-money laundering violations. We will be there live to hear all of it broken down.
We are expecting Merrick Garland and Janet Yellen in just a few minutes. We'll bring that to you live as soon as it happens. Also coming up, we continue our coverage of everything happening at OpenAI. Where are we? We got Sam Altman. Is he coming back? We got a Bloomberg exclusive on the, quote, intense discussions that are underway, including that possible return.
And Ludlow said the contract wasn't signed yet yesterday, so...
And what do we hear from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella?
I'll work with Sam Altman wherever he is.
It doesn't matter where he is. We're going to be working with him.
Could do a full...
Talk about leaving options open.
It's not even a 180. It's a 360.
Yeah, full circle.
All right. So anyway, we're on that. Speaking of discussions, just about an hour ago, we heard from the FOMC minutes, the latest minutes from the last Fed meeting, and they all agreed, unison, proceeding carefully on rates. We also saw many saw downside risks to growth and most saw upside risks to inflation. So we're going to weave that into all of our market conversations.
And we're also going to get into why U.S. bond managers overseeing a combined $2.5 trillion
That's a lot.
are making the case for ditching cash. The folks who want you to get out of the money market funds that they don't own and want you to get into the bond funds that they do own and get fees for.
Wait, what?
I think it's called Talking Your Book.
Yeah, I think it is Talking Your Book. We're going to get into it, though, because it's a lot of money. It's among our most read stories on the Bloomberg. NVIDIA, folks, the big earnings report after the close. It's your top performer in the S&P 500 by a wide margin. It is a big play into generative artificial intelligence. It's those chips that really just accelerate everything, which is necessary for AI. So we're going to be all over their earnings, and we have a few others as well.
Yeah, we also got some retail earnings earlier today, and we're kind of making sense of them. A real mixed bag when it comes to Lowe's, when it comes to Kohl's. Dick's Sporting Goods actually higher on the day as a result of their quarter. Hey, did you see over the weekend the reporting about Sam Altman looking to raise money to build a chip company to compete with NVIDIA?
No.
That was one of the side stories over the weekend.
Well, that's part of what he does, right? Apparently
he starts companies, he builds them.
And that was it okay at OpenAI? Not my understanding it was going to be okay if he went to Microsoft?
I don't know. Okay, so Emily Chang asked about that, and Satya Nadella basically said, you know, if he, it sounded to me, Carol, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my takeaway from that question to Satya yesterday was, if he wants to work at Microsoft, he'll be fully committed to working at Microsoft. That's what it sounded like.
What's Microsoft's is Microsoft's. If
I
you're
don't know.
here.
That's what it sounded like.
It's complicated, folks. Remember we talked about we needed a whiteboard to kind of understand this whole thing? We are going to try and break it down. We have a great roundtable coming up in our 5 o'clock hour with our own Ashley Vance and Max Chafkin. They have been working hard on the ground, at their computers, all over the phones, you name it, emails, since it broke on Friday. So they're going to be with us in the 5 o'clock hour to kind of where we are, where we go from here. Because I feel like it's a constantly TBD story, even though we know so much and maybe he comes back to the company, but it tain't over, I feel like, even if that's what happens.
And we're so lucky that we can just call up these folks and have them join us
Part of the
for the
Bloomberg
program.
Business Week
Yeah,
team.
pretty cool. Hey, did you see the news from Ford earlier today that they're kind of scaling back their EV ambitions
Feels
even
like
more?
we continue to hear headlines or see headlines of folks kind of slowing down the ramp up, or prior ramp up to EVs.
Well, we're going to talk to Brendan Jones, the president and CEO at Blink Charging. He has tens of thousands of chargers around the world that his company has deployed, that they've partnered with, that they've sold, that they operate. We're going to get a sort of his take on what's going on with EVs right now, because it was just not that long ago all these companies were going all in on them.
It's been a sector, though, that's been beaten up. That stock included. They just reported earnings earlier this month. They did beat estimates, and I think they upped some of their forecasts. So we'll see what he has to say. And how do you compete with Tesla in this world? I'm really curious about that.
I don't know, F-150 Lightning versus Cybertruck?
I don't know. And then, of course, we're going to wrap up with a great guest. He's got, I'm guessing, some really cool stories. We're going to be joined by the former music industry executive and producer who discovered REO Speedwagon, Cheap Trick, and more. He produced albums for Motley Crue and Twisted Sister, among others, 4 decades in the music producing business. He's an East Coaster who went to the West Coast, came back to the East Coast. Can't wait to talk with him.
His name's Tom Werman. He's the author of the new book, Turn It Up, My Time Making Hit Records in the Glory Days of Rock Music.
All right, folks, as we said, this is Bloomberg Business Week. It is 3:05 p.m. Wall Street time on this Tuesday. We are awaiting a live press conference at the Department of Justice. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen are expected to make some comments to announce separate but related cryptocurrency enforcement actions. Some of that information has been trickling out, and this has to do with a charging document that was unsealed earlier today. Binance charged with 3 counts, including money laundering violations, conspiracy to conduct an unlicensed money transmitting business, and U.S. sanctions violations. So again, this is what we are reporting because of these unsealed documents, but we're going to get more color, certainly, from these 2 individuals at this live press conference.
Yeah, and in case you're just joining us, our own Bloomberg News team reporting in the last hour that Binance Holdings CEO, CZ, Changpeng Zhao, as he's also known, pleaded guilty to anti-money laundering violations and agreed to pay a $50 million fine Tuesday. This under a sweeping deal worked out with the Justice Department designed to keep the company operating.
Right, Zhao agreeing to step down as part of the settlement, which included the Treasury Department and Commodity Futures Trading Commission. That's according to people familiar with the matter. So that's where we assume when the U.S. Attorney General steps up and the Treasury Secretary of the United States step up, that we will get more specifics and confirmation of our reporting and some of this reporting. This deal, though, keep in mind that this has been going on for years, so it would end a years-long investigation into the cryptocurrency exchange. It is the world's largest, right, global cryptocurrency exchange. This kind of feeds into, I feel like, the last couple of years where all of a sudden the explosion in crypto and then the coming undone.
It was basically a year ago when SBF, when FTX collapsed, and now look where we are with SBF awaiting sentencing later, early next year. One thing, Carol, CZ has agreed to pay a $50 million fine Tuesday. The other part of this is Binance agreeing to plead guilty. So the company agreeing to plead guilty to criminal charges and pay a $4.3 billion fine. That's according to people familiar with the matter. As you mentioned, it ends a years-long investigation into the crypto exchange. I have so many questions about the long-term ramifications of what this means for the crypto industry, but there's still a lot of believers out there.
Criminal charges, though, multiple agencies within the U.S. government that are said to be involved ultimately in this setup. So we are watching watching, for those that are listening and watching us on this Wednesday, we are watching the podium at the Department of Justice. So expecting the U.S. Attorney General to step up at any moment. In the meantime, let's get a check on the market day and the trade. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. And we are just about 52 minutes away from the latest numbers out of NVIDIA. That report will be watched very closely. Right now, we've got NVIDIA shares down by 0.7%. Lots of stories, major stories today, and we've got them all covered for you here at Bloomberg. But right to the numbers now, with the S&P down 6 to 4540. That is a drop of 0.1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 52 points, a decline there also of 0.1%. NASDAQ lower by 77 points, a decline of 0.5%. NVIDIA certainly weighing on the NASDAQ 100 index today. Again, NVIDIA ahead of earnings, down by about 0.8%. Fed Tuesday, we've got the 10-year yielding 4.40%, the 2-year 4.87%. Gold up $21 the ounce to $19.99, a gain there of 1.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude 77.85, up now by just about 2 cents. Binance Holdings CEO Changpeng Zhao has pleaded guilty to anti-money laundering violations and agreed to pay a $50 million fine under a sweeping deal worked out with the Justice Department designed to keep the company operating. And sources tell Bloomberg Sam Altman and members of the OpenAI board have opened negotiations aimed at a possible return of the ousted co-founder and CEO to the AI company. Again, recapping stocks lower, S&P down 8, drop there of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, much appreciated, Charlie Pellet. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Tuesday, November 21st. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic, live here on Bloomberg Radio, on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. Charlie giving you the market setup. We did get those Fed minutes. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in terms of basically everything we knew and basically
Do you want to know the equity and bond market reaction?
Meh. Well, this is what I thought this whole week was going to be. Meh. And then OpenAI happened starting last Friday. And then, of course, we have this presser that we're waiting for from the Department of Justice. So it is a quiet week.
Okay, so let's say Sam Altman goes back to OpenAI. And you go...
Okay.
So we basically go back to what things were like on Friday morning.
So if you fell asleep, like early Friday.
Yeah, Rip Van Winkle wakes up, 5 days later.
Like
nothing has changed except for a lot of ink spilled.
Yes.
And a lot of hours spent and a lot of, I would say probably employees who are pretty stressed out about the future of the company that they work for.
Well, and I'm also curious, though, because I was listening earlier to Bloomberg Radio Surveillance and also Paul and Matt earlier on the tape. And it was interesting in terms of the expectation that there will be lots of legal wranglings for the next few years over what the board did, essentially, in maybe ousting him, and then questions about what happens in terms of the valuation of this company, right? I think people are rethinking, right, how valuable ultimately is this company? And also, I was concerned about, was all the IP, intellectual property, at OpenAI? And some of the analysis was saying no, that because Microsoft is working with this company, they too are privy.
Well, think about the wording of the statement that we got on Friday from the board of OpenAI. It seemed to imply in no uncertain terms that there was a breakdown in communication of some sort between Sam Altman and the board of OpenAI. Satya Nadella, by Emily Chang, was asked repeatedly yesterday about, what did he do to,
what was the breakdown? What was the communication that wasn't shared?
Elicit a reaction from the board like that.
Yeah.
Satya Nadella had no idea. We still have no idea what prompted them to separate with Sam Altman.
There's a lot of questions still out there, and you do wonder about, after all that's happened, so if he does ultimately go back or gets a seat on the board, is it the board composition stay the same? I mean, there's a lot of questions now, and where's the trust going forward in essentially what was a corporate coup, right, in terms of kicking him out? So you do wonder going forward. I do get the feeling from Emily Chang's interview with Satya Nadella, of course, the head of Microsoft, that this is an important part, though, this relationship and having access to some of this technology, their development, is important to Microsoft going forward, even though they've got their own mission, in terms of AI.
I mean, look no further than the news that we woke up to yesterday morning, Carol, where we, that Sam Altman was going to be head of a new organization, a new entity at Microsoft. I mean, you don't. I don't know if you don't get hired for a job, within a matter of days in this day and age, unless it's there are background checks, there's due diligence that happens from a lowest level employee all the way up to the highest level employee.
Especially
they go back and
like
read old tweets, or so we thought they did.
Well,
maybe they don't if you're
did.
the new CEO of OpenAI.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? How quickly that happened, and I did feel like I think as many observers thought that Satya Nadella was really just trying to come, everybody, we've got this, we're good, we're going to have access to Sam no matter where he ends up, Mars, Meta, no, I'm just kidding. But I mean, that we're going to have access to his brain, essentially, and the work that he has done. So, I don't know. This is going to be something we're going to unpack a little bit later on.
Well, speaking of having access to a couple brains, we got access to a couple great brains right now. Among the most read on the Bloomberg, a story by our own Michael McKenzie about the big-time bond managers, think Capital Group, Double Line, PIMCO, and TCW. Combined, they oversee $2.5 trillion. You heard us talking about this at the show open. They've got a bit of advice for investors. It's time to put that money to work. We also, for our economic and bond market roundtable, have Bloomberg Economics U.S. economist Stuart Paul joining us, along with rates reporter Michael McKenzie. They're both here, Carol, in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio.
All right, guys, so let's get to it, because I find that story, it's among the most read, as Tim said. Michael, your story. But I do want to first, Stuart, just, we got the Fed minutes. Seems like par for the course. We know this in terms of their concerns. Is there anything you think our Bloomberg audience needs to take away from those minutes?
Financial stability concerns and financial conditions really dominated Fed thinking going into the meeting. Of course, we saw that run up in long-term rates. That was most front of mind, more so than the blowout Q3 GDP numbers, more so than the blowout jobs number from the September data. So the Fed has been keeping an eye primarily on what's been going on in rates markets. That's going to be an increasingly important determinant of policy rates going forward. And so the retreat in long-term yields in the week since the meeting it should be something that'll make the Fed, the hair on the back of Jay Powell's neck stand up a little bit.
That's exactly where I wanted to go. Let's bring in Michael McKenzie, because I know you can speak to this, Michael. With rates coming down since the last Fed meeting, we've talked about this before. The bond market isn't necessarily doing the same amount of work that it was doing a few weeks ago on behalf of the Fed.
No, I mean, the bond market's really taken to heart the signs of weakness that's beginning to come through the labour market and softer inflation prints that we saw earlier this month. And I think they've sort of jumped to the next logical trade, which is, okay, Fed's done. When do the rate cuts come? And at the moment, the bond market's looking June for the start of rate cuts. And as we speak now, they're still pricing in close to 100 basis points of cuts for next year. So it's sort of in line with a bit more than what the Fed is expecting, because the Fed only expects 0.5% of rate cuts next year. But we'll get an update from the Fed in December when they update their latest quarterly projections for both rate cuts, for rate policy, inflation, and obviously growth.
We're going to talk with Gina Martin Adams a little bit later on in terms of the equity market and investing outlook for next year. And some of her research certainly looks into the idea of kind of obviously the economy, recession. Stuart, do you see recession as part of the thinking around what we get in 2024? Is there some kind of recession ultimately?
So it's not part of the Fed's thinking right now. As Powell noted in his post-meeting press conference, and as we see in the minutes today, Fed staffers stripped out a recession from their forecast. We think that a recession is more likely than the Fed staff does. We think that the deteriorating consumer outlook is going to be a problem that the Fed is going to ultimately have to wrestle with. We think that shrinking inventories is a problem that the Fed is going to have to wrestle with. And with shrinking corporate profits and tighter financial conditions, fixed investment outlook does not look especially good. Well,
I know you're a macro guy, but I got to go to the equity market to you. Do you think the equity market reflects that concern about deteriorating economic conditions?
No. No, I don't think so. I'll leave it to Gina to comment on it. But it's the sort of thing, I don't think that equity markets reflected. Looking at the Fed minutes today, Fed staffers specifically commented on equity valuations being stretched, and that's relative to their judgment that there will not be a recession, right? So from a macro perspective, at least from the seat that I'm sitting in, no, equity valuations do not reflect recession risk.
She says a second dip in the U.S. economy is likely underway, could create complications for parts of the S&P 500 that largely avoided the 2022 slump, and that's something we're going to talk into, this kind of double dip idea. Michael, Tim and I kind of laughed. Okay, it's the guys who don't have money markets are saying, hey, it's time to do something else. Pull it out and give it to us.
Yes. Well, I had a great trip out last week to the West Coast and got to speak to these people in person, which is always good.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. Look, it's a pot of gold sitting in money market funds, and for good reason. You're getting the best returns on T-bills since the early 2000s.
Yeah.
You haven't seen this for a long, long time. So, and obviously the active bond management industry has gone through a terrific 3 years for most of them.
You said horrific, right?
Yeah, it's
not
been
terrific.
No, it's
okay.
horrific.
Just making
horrific.
Sure.
It's
okay.
bad.
With a capital H. So clearly they're going to be, okay, guys, come on, it's time. But I think they've got a few things in their favor here, because once you're at these current levels in yield, you'd have to get close to a 1% sell-off in the bond market to actually lose money from fixed income now, if you look at the Bloomberg US aggregate.
Yeah.
Because we've now backed up enough. We've repriced sufficiently higher in yield that there's enough coupon to offset any kind of, say, pickup in inflation, which would then get the bond market thinking, oh, maybe the Fed's going to have to raise rates again.
So maybe the worst over, right?
Yeah. So from that perspective, essentially the risk reward now is if the Fed does have to come back in next year and hike again, you're going to be flat. But the reward here, and this is where I think it's quite interesting, is when you talk to these bond investors, Double Line, PIMCO, they only really want to own out to about 5 years. They're only telling investors...
That's what I'm curious.
You go from bills... They don't really like the idea of extending towards 10 and even longer, because as a couple of them relate to me, you've got a deficit running at 6% of GDP. If you go into recession, yes, the bond market will rally, but we also know that deficits tend to rise in a recession. So you could actually be in a very nasty scenario at some point, if we do go into recession at some point, that the bond market's going to be wrestling with this, okay, you want to be in the front end, the 2-year will rally, the 3-year and the 5-year. But the long end, it becomes a bit of an orphan now because the deficit's going back up. And then suddenly, can Washington keep spending to support the economy? Does the Fed need to cut more? And if the Fed cuts more than, say, below 3.5%, you then have to price in a higher inflation premium for owning 10 years and plus.
Right.
Because if the Fed isn't back to its target, you've still got an inflation problem. So it was a real nuanced
Were
message.
they all consensus? All consensus?
Pretty
in
much
terms of
everyone
their
was
thinking?
saying that, and also very defensive on credit.
Yeah.
They look at the high yield market and say, I'm just not getting paid enough to really extend out into aggressively.
Isn't that a little odd? Or is it not?
No, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
the high yield market's kind of dodged the bullet here to date, because if you look at small caps, they've taken a big hit because farmers really taken a hit, and so have regional banks. And so regional banks aren't, the bonds from regional banks don't show up in the high yield index.
Okay.
But what's interesting now is that energy prices are coming off. We know that there's a lot of energy debt, and that's going to be one to watch in the next few months. If oil prices keep falling, how good are these balance sheets for some of these small cap energy guys in the junk bond market?
Hey, Michael, I just want to throw one more your way.
Sure.
Why are we thinking of the $2.5 trillion that are in money market funds right now?
No, it's 5.7 trillion in money
5.7
market
trillion.
funds. 2.5 trillion is what's managed by those four firms.
Why are we thinking that all the money that's in money market funds would be going into the bond market versus going into the equity market?
Again, not all the money will go, but if we think back to what happened after 08, 09, it predominantly started going into fixed income, and then it began to go into equities. The thing is, if the bond market does rally because the economy is really slowing down, you probably don't want to be in risk assets like equities. You actually want to own
Unless
some
you can
fixed
buy
income.
into equities at a really low level.
Yeah, I think here's the other interesting thing. If you get a sudden drop in equities, then I think it's reasonable to think that a chunk of money sitting in money markets would go, oh, we're down 20% in the S&P, I should buy that. I mean, at the end of the day, stocks deliver you very good long-term appreciation. Bonds are just there to give you income. And that's the big difference between stocks versus the bonds.
And if you're a little nervous, right? It's a great way to kind of write it out. Just one last quick thought. Stuart, as you listen to what Michael had to say, any kind of takeaways in your view?
It's interesting. So it sounds like what you're hearing from folks in the West Coast is similar to what we heard from Druckenmiller, for example, last week or the week before at Robinhood when he was in conversation with PTJ. And it sounds like willingness to own the front end of the curve out to the belly, but fiscal trajectory is really going to end up being a problem. That's something that we've been harping on since about April, if not earlier. It's something that we wrote about, our own David Wilcox and Mava Cousin wrote about maybe just 2 weeks ago. And it's the sort of thing that's coming up surprisingly, actually, in the Fed minutes today, where FOMC members who typically steer pretty far away from fiscal policy were even willing to acknowledge that the run-up in rates was likely a consequence of people realizing that the fiscal trajectory is unsustainable.
Yeah, and as we talked with someone out of France yesterday, one of their officials, deficits is something on the minds globally of many, many governments. Hey, guys, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much. So appreciate it. Bloomberg Economics U.S. economist Stuart Paul, along with Bloomberg News rates reporter Michael McKenzie, both in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio.
Hey, check out the new Bloomberg Business app. It features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You can listen to Bloomberg Business Week and all of our Bloomberg radio programs at any time. All you got to do is download the Bloomberg Business app on your smartphone and connect your phone to your car. It's free in the Apple App Store or on Google Play, thanks to our sponsor, Interactive Brokers.
All right, so the story that still is TBD in terms of how it sort of ends, we're talking about OpenAI. Bloomberg News reporting exclusively that OpenAI said is to be in intense discussions to unify the company after another tumultuous day that saw most employees threaten to quit if Sam Altman doesn't return as CEO. The latest headlines from our team is about Sam Altman and the OpenAI board open talks for his possible return. So it's kind of like, I got whiplash, everybody. I got whiplash.
Hey, back with the seasoned tech view to help us kind of make sense of all this whiplash is Andrew McAfee, principal research scientist at MIT. He's the author of a new book, The Geek Way, The Radical Mindset That Drives Extraordinary Results. He joined us last week, but we wanted to have him back on after the news of Sam Altman happened on Friday. He's also a visiting fellow in technology and society at Google, that is Andrew McAfee, where he's working with Google on research related to the societal impacts of generative AI, and Andrew joins us on Zoom from Boston.
Andrew, great to have you back with us. Radical Mindsets, your book, you write about that in it. Sam Altman and OpenAI, do they kind of fit into that in your view?
You know, they were certainly operating like a fast-charging, high-performing geek company, and then this very strange episode started to unfold on Friday.
So how do you, from someone who has watched technology, has seen trends, seen innovation, how are you looking at this? And what's the significant thing kind of longer term, especially as we all expect generative AI to be a part of our lives forever, probably?
I absolutely expect that. And I think this is just a crystal clear case study of the importance of good old-fashioned, boring corporate governance and running a good board. This feels like a huge unforced error on the part of the OpenAI board, and I still don't quite understand it.
Yeah, I think you're not the only one who doesn't quite understand it. We don't even know why he initially was fired at this point, and we're kind of following every move of will he or won't he go back to OpenAI. It doesn't sound like even Satya Nadella at Microsoft, Carol, knows why he was fired.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's interesting. I mean, is it important in your view, Andrew, that we know every detail in terms of how this ends? Or what is ultimately the important thing that we get out of this, or how it ends in your view?
I don't think we're ever going to know all the details, but we do know that if you have an extraordinarily popular, very effective CEO at growing a tech company, the board might not want to fire that person with no notice, really, without apparently engaging in a lot of back and forth with him, not for any fraud or misconduct or malfeasance, but because of some other kind of vague problem. If the board is going to take that fairly rash step, they probably want to alert their major investors, their biggest business partners, their employee base, and give them time to get ready for all that. They didn't appear to do any of that. And when they were frantically negotiating over the weekend to try to bring him back, That all fell apart, and it fell apart to the extent that the huge majority of the employees of the company have signaled that they will walk away. Whatever you think the board's duty is, I can't see how it includes destroying that much value, hollowing out the employee base of the company, and if the mission of the OpenAI Foundation is to advance safe AGI for humanity, I do not see how these actions support that mission at all.
Hey, business school, this is a case study of how not to do things, basically.
There are plenty of examples of that, by the way.
There is plenty. They're all that, right?
Yeah.
Often, or usually. I'm wondering, Tim was really smart in terms of our discussions that we've been having around this about what seems to be maybe at odds, and that is this debate about a need for balance of pushing generative AI, this technology, expanding, exploring it to reach its potential, but with also having an ethical line because of the potential of it to do wrong. Although I would go back to the Cold War and missiles and the battle to have the greatest and best in terms of military and how that could bring the end to civilization. So I'm trying to kind of figure out what is at risk if we get this wrong. Help me here.
Yeah, whatever is at risk, if your organization's mission is safe AI, and you believe apparently that a for-profit company is not the right way to accomplish that mission, then doing things that let your CEO, and again, almost all of the employees, wind up at an AI building for-profit company. They appear right now to be, a lot of them, heading to Microsoft. That is not accomplishing the goals of your mission. I personally am not worried about the alignment risk of AI. All very powerful tools bring risks and harms with them, and they demand vigilance, and we got to be careful about it. I don't think AI is any big exception to that trend or requires us to do radically different things. We just have to be vigilant, stop the bad uses.
That is really, really surprising for me to hear from you, Andrew, because I hear from the worst case scenario when it comes to this stuff is, okay, what if AI develops some sort of super bug or biological weapon, or in fact, in the Elon Musk school, essentially becomes sentient and more powerful than human beings? Why does that not worry you?
I read a lot of science fiction as a kid, too. I think Terminator sci-fi scenarios are not great guides to policy, are not great guides to using this very powerful, very beneficial toolkit. I do think that there's a risk that AI, for example, could be used as part of an effort to engineer bad bugs or bioweapons. Great. Why are we focusing on AI and not gene editing and not gene sequencing technologies? And why are we letting anybody apply to molecular biology and genetics doctoral programs and distributing that knowledge very freely? There are risks in the modern world. Let's not be naive about that. But singling out AI as the linchpin that's going to make everything bad happen, I just think that's wrong. I think that's a misallocation of our effort.
Okay.
And demonizing technologies that will be super beneficial to us, I think, is a lousy idea.
Well, let's move away from the superbug concern and more to the concern that it will become a sentient being that is more powerful and smarter than us, and essentially a higher order being than we are.
Override us, essentially.
Yeah, why does that not concern you?
My friend and colleague Andrew Ng, who is himself a fantastic AI researcher, says it's theoretically possible. I love his phrasing. He said it's like worrying about overpopulation on Mars. We have so many more important things to worry about. We have to accomplish an energy transition in the 21st century. We have too high a disease burden. There are too many people in dire poverty around the world. I believe that AI might be the most powerful tool that we've ever come up with to help us solve these global planetary challenges facing humanity. And we're sitting around worried about the Terminator when there's not a shred of evidence that AI has become sentient or taken control of anything that we don't want it to. I think it's like bad policy, bad sci-fi makes bad policy.
Andrew, full transparency, you're working with Google on research related to the societal impacts of generative AI. I am curious, though, what is the balance you all at Google are pursuing when it comes to generative AI reaching its potential, but also being smart about it and careful with it?
Yeah, thanks for that, because I really want to make clear here I am just talking about my own personal views. I am not representing Google's views on this. I actually am not on top of everything that Google believes. What I do know, because I read the statement like the rest of the public did, that Google's stance is that we need to be bold and responsible. I think we are in danger of walking away from the bold part in an overabundance of not just caution, but fear about things that we just don't have any evidence for. I want to say this again. This is my view, not necessarily Google's view.
I think, Andrew, everything that we've talked about in terms of fears, personally, again, I'm speaking personally in terms of this, and I'm almost a layperson when it comes to this stuff. The thing that most concerns me about generative AI is misinformation and the ability for bad actors to use that misinformation at scale to control outcomes.
Like happens in social media?
Exactly. Not that different than a lot of accusations that we saw fly in the wake of 2016 and 2020 elections here in the U.S. But if you thought a bot army of people, you know, in Eastern Europe with social media were scary, then what about an actual bot army of generative AI that's able to, you know, do this stuff at scale, Andrew?
Now, that's a harm that we should be worrying about, because I got fooled by that picture, that alleged photo of the Pope in the puffy white coat.
He looked good,
I thought the Pope was wearing a puffy white coat.
It looked cool.
I really did. I got taken in by a photorealistic deepfake. These are actual challenges. And like you say, bad actors are going to weaponize generative AI to do all kinds of harm or try to do all kinds of harm. This is a real risk. It's a real harm. I have faith in our ability to deal with the harms that technology brings us. I think we can find ways to have trusted sources that will verify whether a thing is a deep fake or not. All of us have the news sources that we run to when we see something that might be true or might not be true. We can strengthen those kinds of institutions and those kinds of responses. We can also educate people to be more discerning consumers of the news. These are all things that we can and should do. Sitting around worrying about the Terminator instead is, as I said, just a huge misallocation of our attention.
I think the Terminator coming to life is more realistic than educating the large populace with news judgment, but I'm a cynical person, I guess.
That's a little cynical.
Yeah, I know.
All right, everybody. What's interesting, too, though, is, you know, you talk about, you know, you have faith to deal with the harms that this technology maybe will ultimately bring us. Should there, though, be some guardrails in place? You know, shame me once, you know, shame, or fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on, you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
Okay, George W. Bush.
Where's ChatGPT?
We don't get fooled again, right?
But I guess my point is, whether it's social media, whether it's crypto, there's a lot of things out there that's like, oh, I guess we should have been doing this. Yeah. Is there something we should have in place at this point when it comes to generative AI?
I think what we should have in place is a very agile system for becoming aware of the harms and dealing with the harms as they crop up. For example, after smartphones were out for a while, we learned that a bunch of losers were using them to take pictures up the skirts of women, you know, as they commuted to work on the subway. Right. We didn't outlaw the smartphone. We didn't make smartphone makers apply for a license to use a camera. We didn't make all of us apply for a license to have a camera-equipped smartphone. Around the states anyway, lots of legislatures acted really quickly to make that particular use of the phone illegal. Fast response to the harms that come up is my preferred approach for dealing with these. I don't trust me or you or anybody else to sit around right here and correctly anticipate all of the things that will happen and all of the effective ways to head that off. I just don't.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. I'm so glad we got some more time with you. Andrew McAfee, Principal Research Scientist at MIT, author of a new book, The Geek Way, The Radical Mindset That Drives Extraordinary Results. Also, the Visiting Fellow in Technology and Society over at Google, joining us on Zoom from Boston. Andrew, thank you so much. Be well. Now to the Justice Department, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland at the podium, along with U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, expected to make some announcements. Let's go there.
By Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, and CFTC Chairman Russ Benham. We are here today to announce that the Justice Department has secured felony guilty pleas from the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, Binance, and from its founder and CEO, Changpeng Zhao, also known as CZ. Separate from the criminal enforcement actions, the Justice Department is announcing today Secretary Yellen and Chairman Benham will also announce civil regulatory enforcement actions.
and the Treasury Department and the Treasury Department and the CFTC are taking against Binance. While criminal and civil enforcement actions are subject to different legal standards, this collective effort represents the whole of government approach that we are taking to combat corporate crime. Binance has agreed to plead guilty to willfully violating the Bank Secrecy Act, knowingly failing to register as a money transmitting business, and willfully violating the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. These laws ensure that our financial institutions are not available to designated terrorist organizations, drug traffickers, and sanctioned nation states that threaten public safety and our national security. The Justice Department is requiring Binance to pay $4.3 billion in penalties and forfeitures. This is one of the largest penalties we have ever obtained from a corporate defendant in a criminal matter. The Justice Department is also imposing a monitorship as well as reporting requirements on Binance as part of today's resolution. Moving forward, Binance must file the suspicious activity reports that were required by law. The company is required to review past transactions and report suspicious activity to federal authorities. This will advance our criminal investigations into malicious cyber activity and terrorism fundraising, including the use of cryptocurrency exchanges to support groups such as Hamas. While this historic plea is an important measure of accountability, we know that corporations only act through the individuals who run them. That is why we have also filed a felony charge against and secured a guilty plea from Changpeng Zhao for willfully violating the Bank Secrecy Act. As CEO of Binance, Zhao willfully violated federal law that requires financial institutions to guard against money laundering and terrorist financing. Zhao, who resides outside of the United States, entered his plea in person in the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington earlier today. In August 2017, Zhao founded Binance as a platform where users could trade in cryptocurrency. But from the very beginning, Zhao and other Binance executives engaged in a deliberate and calculated effort to profit from the U.S. market without implementing the controls that are required by U.S. law. Zhao and Binance attracted and built a substantial U.S. customer base. Almost 2 years after Binance's founding, Zhao told senior management that the U.S. market represented 20 to 30% of the company's potential revenue. Serving these U.S. customers meant that Binance was a U.S. financial institution. U.S. financial institutions must comply with U.S. law. Zhao and other senior management at Binance understood this. They understood that the company was required by U.S. law to register with the Treasury Department as a money services business. And they understood that they were required by U.S. law to implement an effective anti-money laundering program. They failed to do either. Instead, they concluded that complying with U.S. law would stifle their efforts to grow Binance's profits, market share, and trading volume. So, rather than comply, Binance facilitated billions of dollars of unregulated cryptocurrency transactions.
Connection lost.
It willfully enabled hundreds of millions of dollars in transactions between American users and users subject to U.S. sanctions. And its platform accommodated criminals across the world who used Binance to move their stolen funds and other criminal proceeds. Binance prioritized its profits over the safety of the American people. In part because of the crimes it committed, Binance became the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world. Now, Binance is paying one of the largest corporate penalties in U.S. history. Binance employees knew and discussed that the company was serving thousands of users in sanctioned countries. And they knew that facilitating transactions between U.S. users and users in sanctioned countries would be in violation of U.S. law. But they did it anyway. Binance enabled nearly $900 million in transactions between U.S. and Iranian users, and it facilitated millions of dollars in transactions between U.S. users and users in Syria and in the Russian-occupied Ukrainian regions of Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk. Binance's own compliance personnel also knew that the company's anti-money laundering procedures were inadequate and would attract criminals to the platform. In a February 2019 chat, one compliance employee wrote that they needed a banner that said, quote, "Is washing drug money too hard these days? Come to Binance. We got cake for you." By failing to comply with U.S. law, Binance made it easy for criminals to move their stolen funds and illicit proceeds on its exchanges. For example, between August 2017 and April 2022, there were direct transfers of approximately $106 million in Bitcoin to Binance.com wallets from Hydra. Hydra was a popular Russian darknet marketplace, frequently utilized by criminals, that facilitated the sale of illegal goods and services. Binance only stopped processing Hydra transactions in April of 2022, when the Justice Department and our criminal law enforcement partners seized control of the Hydra marketplace and shut it down. From February 2018 to May 2019, Binance processed more than $275 million in deposits and $273 million in withdrawals from Best Mixer. Best Mixer was one of the largest cryptocurrency anonymizing services in the world before it was shut down for money laundering. Binance also did more than just fail to comply with federal law. It pretended to comply. In June 2019, Binance publicly announced that it would block U.S. users from Binance.com and launch a separate U.S. exchange. That exchange, Binance.us, would register with the Treasury Department and serve the U.S. market. Binance blocked some U.S. users on Binance.com and redirected them to the U.S. exchange. At the same time, however, Binance continued to allow some of its most important high-volume U.S. users to remain on the unregistered Binance.com exchange. At the direction of Zhao and other senior leaders at Binance, employees encouraged their high-volume U.S. users to conceal their U.S. connections, including by creating new accounts that obscured their locations. As Zhao himself said in a September 2019 chat, quote, "If we blocked U.S. users from day one, Binance will not be as big as we are today. We would also not have had any U.S. revenue we had for the last 2 years." He then added, quote, "Better to ask for forgiveness than permission," close quote. Over a year after Binance publicly announced that it was blocking U.S. users, an internal monthly company report attributed 16% of its total registered user base to the United States. That was more than any other country on the unregulated Binance.com platform. In the next monthly report, Binance removed the United States label and recategorized U.S. users with the label UNKWN, short for unknown. In October 2020, users labeled as UNKWN represented approximately 17% of Binance's registered user base. Binance and Zhao profited significantly from their violations of federal law. That they are facing accountability for their crimes is due to the extraordinary hard work of the extraordinary public servants at the Department of Justice. I want to thank the Criminal Division's Money Laundering and Asset Recovery Section, the National Security Division's Counterintelligence and Export Control Section, and the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Washington for their excellent work. I also want to thank Secretary Yellen and her team at the Treasury Department, including IRS Criminal Investigation, as well as CFTC Chairman Benham and his team for their extraordinary partnership in this matter. In just the past month, the Justice Department has successfully prosecuted the CEOs of 2 of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchanges in 2 separate criminal cases. The message here should be clear. Using new technology to break the law does not make you a disruptor. It makes you a criminal. This Justice Department has no tolerance for crimes that threaten our economic institutions and undermine public trust in the fairness of those institutions. And we will hold accountable the individuals who commit and profit from them. I'm now pleased to turn the podium over to Secretary Yellen.
Deputy Attorney General Monaco and CFTC Chairman Benham on such an important occasion. We're here today to announce the Treasury Department's historic action, the largest enforcement action in Treasury's history against Binance, the world's largest violations of U.S. anti-money laundering and sanctions law. Protecting the U.S. financial system, and through that, the global financial system, is core to the Treasury Department's mission. IRS criminal investigation thoroughly investigated key aspects of Binance's activities. Our work revealed that Binance claimed to have exited the U.S. market years ago, but actually did not, retaining U.S. users and other significant ties with the United States. It also had critical gaps in its anti-money laundering program and practices, from a lack of risk-based procedures for various offerings to instructing staff to withhold information from law enforcement. It deliberately undermined its own sanctions monitoring controls, and it failed to report suspicious transactions. This meant Binance was allowing illicit actors to transact freely, supporting activities from child sexual abuse to illegal narcotics to terrorism across more than 100,000 transactions. That includes